So welcome to the Next 10 mini summit. Hi, Matteo, he was just waving. I guess everybody could see that. Beth is here with us as well. I guess Beth, it's I don't know if you can, but if you turned on your camera and blocked it, you would show up better in the recording. We could see you when you talk, but if not possible, just thought I'd mention it anyway. Yep. Going to quickly share my screen with the agenda. So where did I put that? Okay, here we go. Actually, here I should probably, let me just make it so that we can see a bit better. Okay, so this is the agenda that I'd put together. A quick review of just what we've done to date. We can do that as quickly or as slowly makes sense for people in terms of how much they've kept on track of that part. But again, meant to keep that short. Then get into it says my screen sharing is paused. Does that make sense?
It looks weird to me, but
it looks weird to me. It's just a blue line.
Okay, so let me stop this and I'm going to try sharing again. I did move it from one screen to another, so that's probably what happened. Okay, so you now see the agenda?
Yep.
Okay. So this was a quick agenda I put together. So quick review of the work to date, try and keep that short, then get into looking at the technical priorities. We have some data where, the team had gotten together, brainstormed that. We got some things from the collaborators, and the goal would be to convert that into, what we want to write down as priorities for the project. The next one is the next 10 years for collaborators. So that's talking about, not necessarily the technical priorities, but what we think it should look like in terms of, the collaboration experience, governance, that kind of stuff. And then finally, use the last bit to try and make sure that we have, some concrete outcomes, some next actions, and, we've captured, say, our draft of what we would actually PR in as some of the priorities. Goals for each section are to come up with a set of notes and a list of key next steps. And, we plan at least a sort of 10-minute break between the sessions, depending on how time is going. So I guess the first question would be, is there anything else that people think we should put onto the agenda? If not, let's move forward. Sorry, I don't know what that happened there, but. So just, in terms of what we've done so far is we've put together this list of constituencies. So this is, what we have come together and documented as the different groups that, have a stake or have requirements or have needs in terms of Node. So including the direct end users, people who operate applications, application developers, the library package authors, of course, the contributors to core, the organizations who invest in Node and who, so for example, organizations who bet on Node or developers who, groups who actually, say we're going to standardize on using Node and so forth. They have a stake. Education, so education, so people like teachers and students. So sort of the ecosystem around helping people learn. We want to make sure that we meet their needs in terms of helping people learn Node. And including people being able to show that they've got certain qualifications like certification. And then the last one was the security practitioner. So the people who basically handle the life cycle of security issues. We want to make sure that we cover their needs as well. So we've already worked on that. It's just going through this quickly because it's sort of like we want to look through, keep the constituencies and what they need through, you know, as what we consider or go back to when we're discussing the priorities. You know, how are we meeting or not meeting the needs of those constituencies as we've understood and documented them. So based on those constituencies, we then went through and looked at what all their needs were. So just as a quick walkthrough so that we have them fresh in our mind as we think through the other sections, you know, a good understanding of the direction of the project is one of them. And in fact, you know, maybe this next 10 work is part of what we're doing to help support that. The ability to affect the direction of the project, consumable APIs and docs, predictable, stable releases, innovation at consumable pace, easy installation, easy issue reporting, resolution, collaboration, broad deployment platform support, broad desktop platform support, consistent and intuitive error handling, runtime diagnostic tooling, development time diagnostic tooling, relevant APIs and core, module dependency info and management. So this is, you know, obviously the ecosystem of modules is a key part of any node application. Ways to fund their work for some of the constituencies, ability to assess the impact of changes that they make. You know, we want good resource usage and performance. So we make good, you know, we're basically using our resources effectively. Good security and CV practices, better CV management in the ecosystem. So this isn't necessarily within Node Core itself, but what can Node do to help support, you know, good CV management and the ability to sort of do a good job while you know, keeping the work reasonable and so forth. Good CI infrastructure and experience in the project, supportive collaboration environment and collaboration environment. That's probably related, you know, to that section in terms of the collaboration approach and the basically what we want are the key things that are important to make sure that we are successful as we move forward in terms of contributing. Better ways to build consistency in the project, easy contribution workflow, ability to embed and bundle Node.js, the runtime itself, a well-maintained and secure standard library, and assets that show Node.js is a good choice. So these aren't all things that necessarily are in Node Core itself today, or need to be in Node Core, but they're the key needs that we've called out. We did do a survey to sort of, you know, refine these. And so I'm just trying to go back there. I guess I'm going to have to go back here. Just as a reminder for people, if you want to go and take a look at the survey data, it's available in the repository. You know, we have the results in a PDF with a presentation, and, you know, we use that to confirm the constituencies and the needs that we brainstormed and put together to make sure, you know, we hadn't missed any. In fact, we PR'd some additional ones in based on the survey results. So I just wanted to mention that as, if people are interested, they can go look at the survey results because they're in the repo. So that was all I'd planned for the quick walkthrough of the constituency needs and so forth. You know, before we move forward, I don't know if there's any questions here. I should promote. You know, are there any things that we think we should discuss or sync on that front before we move on to the other sections?
I guess just a question around the survey. Do we plan to do a follow-up one in like a year's time or 6 months' time? Is that something we plan to do, or?
I think that could be in one of our follow-ups. We don't have a current plan. One thing we do plan to do is to put together a sort of a follow-up in terms of, you know, what we learned from the survey. So I haven't quite got to that, but that's one thing we did want to follow up. You know, having participated, we wanted to make sure that we communicated back what the value that they provided and how it helped us. So we will plan that, and we can certainly plan, like, I think personally, I think this is something that, you know, the priorities aren't going to stay constant over the years. So if we come up with, like, you know, for 2021, 2022, here are the 5 key technical priorities and here are the things in the project, that's probably good for the year, right? But the next year we would want to go through it, and so a survey to get more information on, you know, if there are new things that come up would make sense to me. I could also see us planning a survey once we agree on the technical priorities to see if that aligns with what we've, you know, the broader community as well.
Yeah, I wondered if it'd make sense to do like an annual one, maybe coincided with one of our major releases or something, so we can get feedback at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good thought, that like we might align this effort as a, you know, a once a year thing in line with the releases as well. Yeah, that's a good idea. Any other thoughts, things we want to touch on before we move on to the next section? If not, let's, I don't think, I'm not thinking we need a break between this one and the next one. Is that fair for everybody, or? Okay, I see a 1+1. I do see a few more people adding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in this link. So let me stop presenting. I want to just give everybody the link where they can add themselves in as a participant.
For that doc, I had request permissions. Is this a different one?
This one is a different one, yes.
Okay.
The deck I did in my own account, and I will have to give permissions. The rest of the docs I actually just put as the place where the regular issues are created. So you should be able to get access to that one directly. Let me know if that's not the case. And Beth, are you trying to promote Rick and Sergi?
I am, but I'm not sure if there's a bug or something. It keeps saying that folks are declining the second I
Okay.
click out. I'm not sure if they are.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've tried as well. I didn't get any message. It just hasn't happened quickly. So I think maybe we can ask Rick, who just joined. Did you have trouble joining?
No, I don't have any trouble.
Okay, because I guess when Beth tried to promote you, it said you declined being promoted. But,
okay, yeah, I think I might have tapped the panelist button by mistake. It's okay. I was mostly just I just hopped in and was watching, and then
sure.
Then I must have tapped it wrong or something.
Okay, no problem. And just want to make sure we get everybody in who wants to get in.
Cool.
So Beth, I don't know, maybe you can message Sergi while we move on and see if you can figure out how to get him in. Well, or maybe we should just take a minute or two to do that, because I see now Jean's joining as well.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, how you doing?
Great, thanks.
That's good. Okay, we're just trying to get people promoted. I guess, Sergi, I just allowed you to talk because we're trying to promote you, but not being successful. I'm just wondering if something's happening on your side, or. If you're trying to talk, you're on mute, but. I'm just going to repost, Jean, for your benefit, repost the link where you can add yourself to the attendee list.
Oh, perfect, thanks.
Okay. Okay, sorry, I'm just. Okay, well, I think Sergey's dropped off. Maybe we'll see him back. If Beth, you can keep an eye out for him to come back, that would be great. So I'd say let's move on to the next section, which is to look at the the technical priorities, which we'd put together and sort of work on that side of things. So let me go over to there. That's not what I want. So we'd put together this easy retro. We'd had some discussion voting among the next 10 team. We then went to collaborators and we opened an issue where we had some voting and discussion among the the larger Node.js collaborator group. And I'm just going to paste this in the chat. This is the link for notes on this front. So I will just paste that there. I'm going to open it up myself so I can start to keep some notes. Oops. Did I get that link wrong? Maybe I did, sorry. Going back to cut and paste the right thing. Okay, I think that should be the right link. Okay, so this was, as you can see, this is the list that we had, and I'd propose we sort of go through the top ranked ones, discuss them, and as we do that, build a list which we think is sort of an ordered list of what we think should be on our top technical priorities. And at the end, hopefully we come up with something. I think we need to pick a smaller set, like whether it's 5 or 10, or I don't know, some more constrained number that we say, like, for this year, we think these are the key things. I don't know what people think of that approach. Does that make sense to people?
Yep.
Okay, so let's start with the ones that we see the highest rankings. So I see the top one is modern HTTP requests. I'm just adding that as our, top priorities, and we can like add things and then drop things out of the list or whatever. But like modern HTTP, what do people think in terms of that as a key technical priority in terms of our next success going forward?
It's definitely one of mine. I don't know if it's one of, like, been working on this for a few years now. So
right.
It's literally a long time coming. By the way, we are landing our hopefully a fetch compliant, a spec compliant fetch implementation there sooner, or as spec compliant as
in Indici or something else, or
in
right.
Indici, yeah. So it's moving forward.
Spot fetch. So this is where I guess we need to decide. Do we want to sort of try and go a little bit deeper in these, or do we want to try and go through the whole list, figure out the top, 5 or 6, 10, whatever it is, and then go more in depth in those in terms of like what we should be planning? Or yeah, do we want to go shallow to start and get a shorter list, or try and go a little deeper?
I would recommend do like a shallow at the start.
Okay.
So
yeah,
try to cover them all. Try to cover them all.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay. I did start the streaming at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So the next one we have in terms of the numbers, if I look across here, is TypeScript. So that would be the next, like the number 2 on the list, based on the existing data voting here.
I think,
so what do people, go ahead.
I think there's some complications here on TypeScript versus types. It's even in there.
Yep.
A lot of conversation can be done here to differentiate the two. I think in general, what people the ecosystem want is the ability to run .ts files. I think they do want type support in Node. They want Node to have, stable APIs and all that. But I think the real ask, at least by the ecosystem, is about being able to run .ts files.
How is that different than running TypeScript?
So we have TypeScript in Node Core. We'd use it in Node Core actually nowadays. We have a TS config in Node Core. We don't have any TS files. We don't run the TSC compiler.
Right.
So that's how it's different.
So it's
also we don't
go ahead.
publish the types, Bradley. Also we don't publish the types.
Yeah, people don't want the internal types. Trust me. If you're listening to this, you don't want this.
I know. I am aware.
Okay.
Also related to Node Core types. Currently, those are defined via definitely typed, and we had a lengthy discussion. I can probably try to fetch it back a few times ago. That people said, no, you don't want to Node Core to ship its own types from Node Core collaborators.
Yeah, correct.
So,
including the TypeScript team agrees.
I'm not necessarily sure if the TypeScript teams agrees. I don't think we asked them ever.
I have talked to them directly because I opened that PR and they got a little.
Oh, you talked to the TypeScript team?
I have. So in particular, the fidelity in which we are going to export is not going to be for general user consumption. It's for
no. I mean,
reliability.
yes, but
and that's the problem. There's a disconnect in goals.
Yes, but sorry, we have types for the end users and internal types. I'm talking about types for the end users. Okay, if we plan to have Node Core run .ts files, it means that Node Core needs to ship with its own types. Yeah. So we have for end users. Okay, I don't care about the internal ones. I'm talking for the end users.
Okay. Yes.
And this is the conundrum that we are that I'm talking about. That there was a discussion already that said no.
Right now, I think in the context of this discussion, what I kind of understand is the expression here is that like people being able to get good support for types as an end user is important.
Yeah.
How that's delivered, I don't think we know the right answer yet. Like we would need work, but if we think it's important to satisfy, the types for end users for the success, like however they come, whether it's definitely typed or whether it's Node Core or whether it's something we do in Node Core to help definitely type do their work more easily, that's kind of a separate issue. I think the how can be separate from the do we agree this is an important thing for as a project we should be trying to make sure that whatever the right answer is in place to be and because if we don't have types will we be less successful, that kind of thing.
So I think what Matteo was saying, and I agree with, is we must have types in order to be able to compile .ts files.
Yes.
Right.
So
it could be like, we could say our second priority in the list so far, which can be adjusted or whatever, but would be like, it is important for the next 10 years success that we make sure that there's good types for end users.
Yes, and once that's in, we can think about landing. We can think about bundling TypeScript to some extent. Okay, like it might be that we want to do that, and if we want to do that, then we do it.
I think stepping way back from that and just being like, we should ensure that there are good types, and like so for I know Bradley had done some work to add JS doc, right? I wonder.
It's different. One is stuff that is internal, and the types for end users they need to be crafted manually.
Is there a reason we couldn't add JS doc to help people generate those ones, even if they were generate the?
Yes, there's a reason, and it's kind of convoluted, but there are a variety of APIs that we have in Node Core which are not able to be typed in TypeScript legitimately. They cannot actually be typed due to generic constraints and other things like that. We cannot type them. You have to just write out a definition file and say, this is what the end user should think it is.
What percentage of those?
It's a little higher than you might think, just due to some coding patterns. Things with polymorphic returns in particular are not good for TypeScript. So you have to start doing function overloads for those. JSDoc can't do function overloads. And so now you're at needing definition files already.
Right.
Other patterns where we do have things that do things like promisify, that's not entirely able to be typed. You have to manually type out the conversions for a bunch of stuff.
I guess just trying to understand, like, if it's 20%, then, you know, we might still add some value by being able to generate a portion. If it's 90%, then not so good, right?
I think it's low. I think it's low, but if you generate something and then you have to patch what you generate, that's like doing floating patches. And I don't think that's realistically something we would maintain. I think in theory, we could.
That seems better to me than having to do it all manually, though. But we may be straying into
it's already,
implementation
for the most
solution.
part, done. It's already done manually for the most part.
It's already done manually. So all the work has already been done. So essentially, there are a few people that are maintaining those tirelessly. I think it's 2 or 3 very clear and phenomenal individuals that are doing this for the community with almost no recognition. They're not even part of the Node Core collaborators to make it even more, which they should be to some extent, because they're clearly contributing to the success of Node.js and making Node.js more usable for developers.
So that's the kind of thing we should explore. Like, maybe we need to talk to them and say, is there anything we could do to support them?
Yeah, well, it's one of those discussions that it's that thread that I pointed to.
Yep.
It includes the relevant discussion for this. It's very interesting that like this TypeScript, like so this is why it's conflicting for me, because in that thread, it seems the clear opinion of everybody was, no, we don't want to do that. However, it seems one of the major things that people want is TypeScript. So either you want it or you don't want it.
Right.
Or there is a combination of people that, you know, I don't know how many responders did we had here.
These are the core collaborators.
Yes. So how many core collaborators? Like, again, is it 21? Like, let's say we have 100 collaborators. We got 20% of a collaborator that wants a TypeScript thing. However, if we don't do it, like if we open a PR to implement this, how many will say no? Like,
I think it's an open a PR to do what, right? Like, I don't think people would necessarily have said, like, there's so many different PRs. One could be like, hey, we're going to integrate TypeScript into Node, and that's totally different than people saying we think having good types for end users is important. So we would have to.
In here, it was that the people didn't want to have the types for users even.
Well, in core, right? But I don't see, like, there's still many different options. Like, it would be like, well, you could ship it with core. We could have a separate repo that shipped it and was updated. Yeah. For some reason, that if that was better than definitely typed, we could say, well, is there something we could do? Like, if the people maintaining definitely typed thought that the JSDoc would help in some way, we could consider that. I kind of read this as people recognize that making sure we end up with good types for end users somehow is important. I don't think it's got an opinion on in core directly or not or whatever, but that core should, as a project, we should should pay attention to this, and whatever is the right answer, make sure it happens.
Okay, this has been longer than a shallow discussion.
Sure, yeah, so okay, so let's, I mean, what I'm not hearing is anybody saying we should take that, not include that in one of the top priorities, but there is lots of discussion to figure out, well, what would that mean, right? Does that speak up if that doesn't sort of fit what you're thinking?
I would agree. Figuring out what it means is much larger.
Yeah, okay. I will move on to the next one then, which from the numbers I see is ESM.
We're in better shape than we were a year ago. A bunch of the ecosystem has started migrating and kind of understands the problem rather than stating Node has to kind of just break specification. There's a variety of people starting to port their stuff to the JavaScript spec. Not necessarily, these constraints aren't necessarily done by Node. So we're in better shape. People do want a few features that they consider tied to ESM that are not actually tied to ESM. Mocking, so basic usability for ESM is degraded versus CommonJS because it's more static, it's more constrained. People want HTTP imports and stuff like that. And these are things that they don't really associate with CommonJS or require, either because the problems don't exist or because the feature doesn't make sense for CommonJS. So yeah.
Right, so there's still, I guess what I'm interpreting that is, it's not done. And, you know, if we think that ESM support in Node is important, it should still be a focus area, I think. Is that what you're echoing, or something different?
I think so. I think one of the problems we're going to face, and one thing I don't want to focus on, is loaders as much as people want to. The JavaScript standard is still changing some nitty-gritty stuff about how things like caching works for ESM. And so we should not overload the idea of ESM and loaders together, because loaders just cannot be stable in the near future.
Right, but that's still, like, even if something can't be stable in the short term, I don't know that doesn't mean in my mind that it shouldn't be a priority. Like, it might be something that we should be active in anyway. On the other hand, it could be like, no, we should just ignore this until it stabilizes, right?
It's not going to stabilize anytime soon. And we don't really control it because most of the demands for ESM come from web browsers. So like, we can't have any, it should be a priority, but we have no control over it. So there's not much we can do. Even though we go to TC39. So yeah, if we just separate out loaders, I agree we should have ESM be our priority due to kind of the state of web browsers, and
Loaders has to be a priority. Sorry.
I don't know what to say because we can't ship an actual API for a couple more years.
So the problem here is that you cannot, up until there is even an API that is going to be deprecated and removed soon, we need support for to give the APM vendors a loader API.
So they don't need an actual loader API. There is various ways you can do things through other means outside of loaders. They're also experimental.
Okay, let me reiterate that the use case of, so right now most significant mid-size to big users of Node.js, with company users of Node.js, ship with an application performance monitoring tool. And right now, as a project, those teams cannot move to ESM because the Datadog, Elastic, Google Stack Trace, New Relic of the group do not support ESM. And they're not going to until, well, either they fork some money to get it done, or we give them an API that they can use to implement that thing. So, if considering, like, we need to consider the fact that this is to some extent a Python 2 versus Python 3 situation, in the sense that until we have that path, even if we say, okay, this is experimental, but without a warning, you can use it as you use async hooks for a long while to get this done before async local storage got stabilized. So we could actually follow the same path, but we need to give them something. And it's not that
the loaders API as it exists today is that it's something we know we're going to change. We're in the process of landing a breaking change PR right now.
Again, we need to ship something that it provides some very similar constraints of where we had with async hooks, that essentially it's experimental, but we are not going to massively destroy it within once a release goes into LTS, something like that.
I can't guarantee that for loaders.
Yeah,
Like,
you see that's well, sorry, I mean in that LTS line. Okay, so I don't mean into, like, you see the problem, right? But this is
yes.
Yeah,
I think we're getting a little bit down in the details now.
Yeah, I know.
The fact that we have this much discussion and interest in discussing it, though, I think goes back to, would we agree that ESM belongs, and the related things like loaders and whatever, figuring that out, which we can spend more time later on in the session on, it makes sense to be in that number 3 point in the list so far.
I just don't want loaders in the priority, honestly. And I am one of the people who is actively trying to ship them. I do not think I think it is years away.
I am sorry, Bradley, but this is part of the discussion. So what's the timeline that we're going to tell companies to migrate to ESM?
Until the web stops changing how cache behavior works, it's indeterminate.
However, this is completely the contrary to what our users and the ecosystem is telling us.
I think that's with them not using instrumentation hooks on the web.
Yes,
I mean,
but
that's the whole point. The web intentionally doesn't expose the exact hooks that we are talking about right now. So they are able to make demands that do break our expectations on the hooks. And they do make those demands.
So I'll go back
to tell our people, our users. So your recommendation, Bradley, is if you're using Node.js on the server side, you should stick to CommonJS for the time being. That's what you're saying.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if you use an APM and the APM does include module cache trickery, or if your test framework like Jess does, ESM as a whole, in general, is not right for you.
That's the problem. Like,
that is not about Node. This is not about Node, to be clear. ESM as a whole, as it is specified, as it is evolving, the breaking changes that it is allowing to occur, ESM is not for you.
then we should communicate this to the general public.
I'm fine with that, and they will probably disagree.
That's kind of the problem of that we are in here. We have said that ESM was stable, and people could start.
ESM is stable. It just does not have the same features as CommonJS.
True.
I think I'd just like to bring it back to, like, let's, you know, we're getting a little deep. Does anybody disagree that ESM is an important topic? Like, it belongs in that spot where it came
I
up in
think
the
so.
discussion?
I think so.
I think there's like lots of things we need to figure out, but I think it seems like we do think it's important.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's then, and we'll come back to it. Like, once we get our shorter list, we've got the session at the end to kind of come up with next steps, key things, and so we will come back and dive deeper into those. If I look, next on the list was documentation. What do people think in terms of like key things to work on in the project to be successful going forward?
I don't have a clue.
I think part of the problem is we have reference docs. We don't have examples. We don't really have specification level docs. We're sitting in a middle ground, and it's hard to read our docs.
Actually, our docs, like, from my point of view, our docs are great. However, they don't teach you how to use node.js. They describe what an API does.
Yep.
Right, they're a good reference.
Yeah, but they are not really useful for newcomers also.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'd agree.
This is something I've been wondering about too.
So one thing that I do like on MDN is they have both the reference docs, kind of like we have, but the reference docs also include generally a practical example, not just how to use an API, but a use case in which you may use an API. And then they have entirely separate guides on how to do things like using the Canvas API. And it just goes through like making a small toy application using it. And you go through and you have links to those reference docs, but you see how they work together. Because right now, every API is effectively documented in isolation, not how to use them together.
Yeah, I think this is important, and agree, it's not just quote unquote documentation, you know, or at least not just reference, you know, documentation.
I'm just trying to get the notes. So I guess like so far it's easy as we're at the top ones, you know, we're only at number 4. We could leave this at number 4 and you know, look at the others, and we'll have to like do balance trade-offs and stuff maybe later on, but would we agree that this should be left in as number 4 for now?
Sure.
Okay, I'm just trying to get the, I don't know, Google Docs is just not liking me right now. Why is it?
I see your easy retro board, Michael, and I see documentation as number 3. Are you looking at something different?
This is the link to, let me paste it again into the chat.
Thank you.
So this is the link that is for the notes for this session.
Cool.
And so I'm just typing in there sort of as we go through what we're
Got
talking
it.
about a bit. Okay, thanks.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so docs was the next one. Then after docs, I
Would be
see
serverless.
serverless. Okay.
Not entirely sure that's something we should prioritize, but it is a trend. So this is the first one where I might disagree a little bit on prioritization.
Just the question would be, it's definitely a trend. You can see people think it's important, but is there something that the project needs to do on that front to support serverless?
We certainly need better communication with serverless providers. For example, AWS Lambda did ship ESM support briefly in a blog post, and they quickly pulled it out after they realized a bunch of their instrumentation had problems with ESM. So that's no longer a big blog post point.
Right.
And so that's how we learned that they are doing some custom instrumentation just to run their serverless that is not compatible with ESM, for example, but we don't know what it is, and we still don't know after
Right.
asking. So there's some secrets going on about what they're doing, but I don't think there's much we can do as actionable results.
From my point of view, it's regarding serverless provider. I am going, this is recorded. So if you are at AWS, Google Functions, Azure Functions, whatever, so you can listen what I'm thinking. You should come and collaborate with us. Like it's, I find it extremely weird and unfair that they are not part of the Node Core collaborator community. So it's in order to ship better support for serverless, they should be part of the team.
Yeah, and we want to support them.
Yeah, but they need, sorry, it's not that we want, they need to come and sit at the table. We cannot invent their needs.
Yeah, I would agree. So, Red Hat has a serverless offering as well. And I think, Beth can act as a proxy for, needs from that serverless offering. I kind of agree with I'm not sure what specifically we would do other than maintain some of the other things like, small size, quick startup. I don't know, Beth, correct me if I'm wrong and there's something that comes to your mind.
No, those two were the only things I thought were relevant.
So does quick startup actually need to occur? Because I know a bunch of serverless offerings do keep warm, empty instances.
It's still useful, I think, in terms of some of the, depending on how you configure your like Kubernetes, K-eventing and stuff like that. At some point you still are starting up.
Yeah, but usually for the Kubernetes, they're longer lived than things like functions as a service. Anyway, it would be nice if we got feedback from those people Matteo talked about. We really do need your help in how to solve your problems.
Yeah, well, that's I don't like, some of them I don't even know if they are allowed to talk to us. Like
I suspect no for at least one of the vendors.
Yes, exactly. Like, again, this is more a high level political, it has technical and user ramification, but the result is probably more political in the first, at the highest level. So I don't know if this is something that I don't know, Michael, we can get somebody to, we can get maybe Robin or?
It's actively being worked on that front.
Okay, so it's.
I will say that that's recognized, understood, you know, and we're not in the state that people would like us to be.
Yeah, well, my only thing is every single time somebody at AWS says something, I tweeted them saying, look, you can say all of things about open source, but you're not contributing to Node, and you're using it in one of your top products. So please come and join. Like you're not a good steward of open source. So it's you might be in certain projects, but definitely not.
I'm just taking a few notes to say in serverless for Node.js, in serverless. So I was just trying to sort of capture like serverless. So I'm just taking the note said we would need more involvement, participation from serverless vendors before it makes sense. You know, feedback from Michael and Beth is we don't have specific asks from say the Red Hat serverless perspective. For future success for Node.js and serverless, we need to maintain properties like fast start, small size, but otherwise we don't. I guess I'd say we think we're okay. As far as we know, right? Like I haven't heard anybody saying they're not going to use Node in serverless because of reason X, Y, or Z. If anything, I see that it's kind of the default choice. Does that match what other people see, or?
Well, it's. I think we see a lot of tech Twitter, and we don't see any newcomers, and we don't see a lot of medium big enterprise.
Matteo, your mic is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's robotic.
Robotic.
Yeah, you're breaking up. Maybe try turning off your video if it's still on.
Now? Is it
Oh, that's
now?
better. Yes, much better.
So what I said is I don't think we are seeing a lot of medium to big enterprises around. I think that like lambdas and functions and so on are either really used into the automation area and rather than developing a full application, okay, but it's still a valid use case. And so I think they're less widespread than the reality would be, mainly because I like what I'm seeing on my work at Nearform is the vast majority for us is just containers. Literally. Like there is functions and cloud and lambdas and stuff, but it's more for ancillary topics rather than the bulk of the code. So yeah.
So I guess I'm not hearing anybody advocate that we should add serverless as the number 5 spot. Is that fair?
Well, unless we can get involvement from serverless providers, no. If we could, then yes.
I guess the question to ask ourselves is like, is it crucial to the success of Node going forward? Do we think that we make it a priority, or do we think that that as is our trajectory is good, and like whether we do something or not at this point, it's like, because I guess, Matteo, what I'm saying is if we thought, well, the fact we don't know what to do is different from us. Like if we thought we need to do something or else Node won't be successful, we should still try and do it, right? My take though is we don't necessarily have something we need to do to make nodes successful in terms of serverless.
We don't know.
We don't know. We don't know for sure, but
We
but-
don't know what to do. Like it is, so we need to do something to make Node more successful in serverless. It's just that we don't know what to do.
I guess do we know? I guess we don't know whether, from my perspective, like some of the other ones, it's like I can look at them and say, yeah, we really need to do something, because if we don't provide some focus on ESM, that will slow down overall Node.js adoption. For serverless, I don't know if there is something, but I'm also, it's not like I think that we have to do something or we won't, it will, like, I'm not sure. I'm thinking that if we don't do anything, it may be just fine.
Yes, I agree with that.
Right. So that's kind of
But-
the other things. The other ones are probably higher priority because we know we need to do something. Here, it may be just fine. If we had more involvement, we might have a better view. But it's not to the point where like we have to make it our top priority to go find those other people and get them involved, because otherwise the project's going to fail. Right. Like I think it's like Node seems to be well used in serverless. And so if it's successful, well, that'll pull Node along. So it's like, it would be nice to do more and to do something, but in our current state, it wouldn't worry me too much if it's not on that top list. So sorry, I would go back. So Matteo, would you advocate that we add it? I was going back to the question of like, I didn't say, we've got the first 4 things are on the list, but it sounds like we're trending towards serverless not being on that top list. And, does anybody think that's wrong?
I would add a sentence to the topic to the list saying that reevaluate if when serverless provider join the fold.
Yeah, it could be like, maybe we have a secondary list, which is our like, keep an eye on. But that makes sense.
For me, that's the TLDR here is, it's if they don't, it's a reason why not. They're not
right. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
It's if it's not a priority for them, why it is for us.
Well, it would come back to like, if we really thought for Node to be successful, it needed to be, we could work on it. So, but if we don't, then.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd say we move on to the next one unless anybody wants to sort of advocate that we should include it on the list at this point. The next thing on the list was WebAssembly.
So there are blog posts about, in general, Node is one of the easiest runtimes to get WebAssembly up and running on currently. It's not specifically a WebAssembly runtime. But I agree that this should take a priority. We've even had some features with forward compatibility concerns. So, yeah, I agree. WebAssembly should be on the roadmap. We have to actually design around it for various interop cases.
There is also from my test, I have done some very lightweight tests, but with some of my tests, adding moving certain part of core from C++ to WebAssembly will actually give performance improvements. Like there is even the question of, can we ship some part of core as WebAssembly instead? specifically the one I'm talking about is the HTTP parser. Essentially, it's actually the boundary. It seems that the boundary, given all the recent optimizations in V8, it seems that the boundary crossing between JavaScript and C++ versus the one between JavaScript and WebAssembly, and the one in WebAssembly is thinner. So is cost less CPU time to do so.
Is that including a comparison with fast function calls?
Include that with
V8 has
It's
an
on the-
experimental feature called fast.
no, that does not include.
Okay.
No.
That's all I wanted to know.
So in essentially moving the HTTP parser from C++ to in Undici, moving the C++ the parser from C++ to WebAssembly increased our throughput. That's the number I got. I can send you the PR, Bradley.
Yeah, by how much? I feel like 1% is like nothing. Yeah, so I'm curious like what the percentage is.
Yeah, but it's still like, again, the fact that is not zero.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's not negative.
In fact, it's not negative. You see, it's look, I am. It was even. It was even more useful. Okay, like you know, if the fact that it improves or stays the same makes that we can actually simplify some of our builds. We could simplify a lot of our things.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I think to keep in mind with WebAssembly is there are certain areas within the project that it could help improve the project. And so by prioritizing it externally and like the external interface, we're also making sure that we're kind of able to sustain something that I think is really valuable, which is external people being able to contribute, which is why like I'm sometimes critical of us using Rust in Node or other languages in Node, just because it makes it harder for the direct consumer to contribute. But this WebAssembly kind of rides this boundary of still within the realm of contributable.
This was brought up in the TSC call yesterday. The current dialect we use to contribute to Node core for JavaScript is not for the faint of heart. I don't know if we should say that Rust is harder to contribute than
fair enough.
This.
I think like largely what I mean by that is you have to go learn a different language, which is like if you're already writing JavaScript, you can pick up on the dialect. I agree. I've been playing around with Core again, and it's a struggle. But yes, I entirely agree.
So the key here is you could write idiomatic Rust, for example, and not face this pushback. So it's a question of like, can you write idiomatic or non-idiomatic code? And I think learning a new language and being able to write idiomatic code, for example, is a big bonus.
Fair enough.
So I think on this one, that's we should maybe on this thing, not going too deep. Sounds like so far I've heard most people say that we do think this is important to the future success, that Node has a reasonable integration with WASM and
yes, and not just integration from JavaScript. I think running raw WebAssembly whole programs.
Right. So basically being an option for running, and so I saw somebody typed in UV WASI, so that would probably be part of that, right? I would remove the question mark.
Most likely, I don't think it's necessarily required. And that's a complicated conversation. But WASI at least is a standard that people could agree upon for cross runtime usage.
Okay, so I think it sounds like we could leave that as number 5. Any other discussion on that one before we move on, do you think?
On the performance side, I had a couple of links into the thread. One shows that it's a more or less equivalent or slightly faster, and then there is another link that says that the fact that we now can use SIMD on inside WebAssembly improve things some other percentage point on it. Okay, so it's significant enough. Just
can I just ask which chat? Because I'm opening
it's in
all
the
the chats I
document.
could find.
It's in the doc. It's in the doc.
The doc. Okay, cool.
It's in the doc. So.
Perfect.
I'll repaste it. I'm not sure when you joined, but
Yeah,
in the
I
chat,
joined like 10 minutes ago.
here's the link to the minutes sort of doc we're taking.
Thank you very much.
And then here's the link to, for people who haven't already added themselves to the attendee list, that's the second link, is the one where you could add yourself there. Okay, so let's say that we leave that on the list. The next one, the next highest ranking thing was transaction tracing. What do people think about that?
I think it is what APMs need more than most things for ESM's downfalls.
I also think that cloud providers care about this.
You're muted, Matteo.
Cloud provider can pay. Again,
Yeah.
Going back.
No,
to the
I
same
know.
topic,
Entirely
as
agree.
I was before. As I was before, it's as I was telling before. Like it's I would put that. I would also combine it with the Prometheus style metrics.
Right.
It's I would keep there is a movement around like observability, and it's I would still consider that, and I would put a bunch of things together on that topic.
So maybe yeah, it kind of that resonates with me too. If we wanted to say that, like, making sure that Node has good observability, including the transaction tracings, Prometheus style metrics, logging, that would make sense to me.
And
I don't know what other people think.
I think to Mateo's point, like having those things where we can tell someone, if you want this, you can pay, and here's how here is the path to do that, is very good, because it makes it easier for that justification to happen.
This is more about, though, do we think it's important for the success of Node, right? Like,
Yeah.
Right.
There's the, can we just ignore this and Node will be just as successful?
Yep.
Then great. If it's then it's great if we just say, well, if you want to pay, here's how you can do it. If we think that, if Node has bad observability, less people are going to use it, they'll move to other languages, we won't be successful, then we might want to have it on our list.
Fair enough.
The difference for me is, so those things are happening already anyway in the ecosystem. However, for some of the stuff, they have subpar implementation of those things. Going back to the APM world where they monkey patch out the libraries or other things. Okay.
Right.
So I'm not, there's a big conversation to be had.
Right. And I think, like, for me, having it on the list would mean that, for example, if not that necessarily, our project is going to go out and build the transaction tracing Prometheus, but like if we become aware of things there, like their asks in Node Core or supporting for APIs, it being identified as one of the things we think that's important for the success, that hopefully supports us supporting those asks or needs or whatever.
Makes sense.
I think for this one, we could make it as observability, and that would we'll mention those two that were on the list.
I would also include the diagnostic tools. I don't know, like I would put it as a.
Okay, yep, I've got, I think you're right, like diagnostic tools and logging. That was a fairly high one. So like, I mean, if we add in transaction
Yeah.
tracing, diagnostic tools, Prometheus style metrics, that got quite a few, possibly from the same people, but.
It's exactly, but from my point of view, it's broad enough.
Yeah.
So it's broad enough, and if somebody, for me, it's also one of the at the bottom of the things. Again, with the topic, with the concept of we need, big companies to contribute because they are the ones that mostly need this. And they need to start like provide open tracing providers. Would you like to help out? Okay, and
Right.
There are things like that of and making sure that those from some of those things stuff is already possible. It's just that there is no documentation on how to run Node.js in production well, which is slightly different than I'm writing this down. I think this is a good point. Missing docs on how to run.
Yeah, like in the terms of the diagnostic working group, that's one of the things on the list is how to use a number of the diagnostic tools. So definitely, yeah, you're right that sometimes it's not that you can't, it's just where's the best practice, where's the
like one of the things that, for example, let me make a few examples. Okay? If you want to deploy Node.js on a container inside Kubernetes, you need to do essentially two things in a microservices network. First one, enable DNS caching. If you don't have DNS caching, you might as well stop doing what you're doing and just do that. We don't say this anywhere. Like, I know this, I'm giving away for free my secret sauce. It's I'm eating my, I'm killing my own business to some extent. Okay, but it's I want the community to improve. So DNS caching, and then the second one is HTTP keep alive to be there. Now, those things needs to be documented somewhere. And we don't do a good job at that level of documentation. So
that's actually, that's not actually under observability even though necessarily. That's a separate, that'd be another.
I don't know, like those are question of, it fits into the observability because the typical people that do best practice.
Yeah, so it's kind of best practices. I'm just wondering, I'm just writing it there so we don't forget, like that could be one that we add.
Cut it and put it in here.
Yeah. Because just because it's not on this original list doesn't mean that we shouldn't, discuss it, get it in. Like we want to come up with what do we think the key things are. So let's maybe we can park that one and just see if we can get through the top level list, and then we could figure out whether we want to add that one or not. Or the next thing I think I see there is Quick.
What is this up-to-date ES version JavaScript support? Did we cover it?
Sorry, which column is that in? The
pink one.
Pink ESM. So we covered ESM. Oh, right. So I think that one actually ESM and up-to-date ES version JavaScript support. I think that I would cover under ESM, right?
No, this
Oh,
is
no,
stuff
what's
like
the difference?
weak refs. It's just a support matrix.
Yep.
So can I use data? Basically, putting it in the docs would probably be possible, but I'm not sure our docs are laid out right now in a place where you could quickly search if it's supported.
there's also the MDN module that surfaces all this that is very useful. Perhaps that.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's just So that's basically keeping up to date with the JavaScript standard, right? Is that something where
Well-
we have a gap, or do we get that from V8?
Bradley, I think what you were talking that I agree with, Michael, but also I think what Bradley was talking about is different, unless I'm wrong.
So V8 does not generally have a specific year release. It exactly matches for ECMAScript. It only matches parts of it. So that's why I was saying more like, can I use data? Because we can't really state we have a specific version of JavaScript supported.
That
I think
might come under documentation, would it?
Yeah. I also think that I know we really haven't seen much from William, but Node Green was also kind of this to some extent of like it showed what percentage of compatibility with ES 2015 we had for every version. It still is apparently updating, although there's a lot of errors now, but yeah, I think that is like a closer thing to what we're talking about.
Yes, I'd agree.
We have an attendee waiting too, Michael.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Let me see. Where do I find it? Because I can't see any of that. So there's great. Oh,
You make me co-host. I can keep an eye on it too.
sure, I will do that. Beth. No, so Joe, where are you? Can I make you? There you are. Okay, hold on. Thanks. So that one, I think if I understand that one correctly, though, we go back to that as like up-to-date SGS version JavaScript support was basically keeping up to date with JavaScript, which I think we mostly, like today, we mostly get through V8, right?
Yes, except for host hooks. But those individual.
So I guess it's like, but we could say like, no, that's still key to the success. It's on the list, but we think we're in good shape because, we keep up with Node. I mean, it would support we should continue to keep up with V8, new V8 versions.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that one. Okay, so sorry, then is it okay to move back to Quick was the next one on the list?
I mean, I think Quick is important. I don't really know enough about it to meaningfully discuss it because yeah.
So it's too early to tell.
Yeah.
The key answer here is that it's too early to tell.
I do think that not necessarily Quick, but maintaining up-to-date HTTP and like following HTTP as it evolves is important. I don't want us to get caught in a situation where we have HTTP 1 baked in and like HTTP 5 is coming out and we're struggling to keep up and like we're struggling to get HTTP4 in or whatever, having some kind of portability there, or attachment to it. And I know Quick isn't necessarily HTTP, but it's like, well, my understanding is it's close enough.
It is HTTP3. It's HTTP3.
Okay. Okay.
So
It
modern
is-
HTTP is number 1 on our list already.
Yeah.
That's
So
only
maybe we
for
should
the
just-
request, though.
But
That's
maybe
only
we
for
should
the
just put
request.
Quick underneath that. No?
It's
the
different.
only part, it's different, Michael, because
Okay.
that is about end user APIs. Quick. So our idea for the client is that you will be able to use Quick via Undici completely
Right.
transparently.
Seamlessly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the if we can make it, yes, that would be the idea.
So would we, we talked about serverless maybe being on a bit of a, here's some things we should keep an eye on. Would Quick make any sense in that list instead of on the priority list?
I would say so, yeah. At least at this point, we need to ship it, okay, and see the adoption. Is this going to be a focus? It really depends on adoption. It can be that HTTP1 is gone in 1 year, in 2 years from now. Who knows?
We can only
Okay.
hope.
Well, I'm not even. I really like my HTTP 1.1 spec. Like, it has resisted
That's fair.
decades. So it's very simple. I can explain it at uni. It's simple.
Oh, I think you said
Like-
I could explain it to Tierney.
I can
Okay.
explain it to Tierney as well. Okay. If I can't, by the way, I can't. If I try to explain HTTP3,
Yeah.
my mind explodes. Okay, not yours, mine.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but we're not sure whether we think Quick support is key to node success yet, but it would make sense on kind of a watch list.
Yeah.
It's a watch list. Yes.
Okay. Watch list. Okay, because I kind of like that idea. Okay, so I just want to see if, like, we got maybe what I'm going to suggest is we continue on this until 12. And then take a bit of a break and come back for the second session. So let's see what we can, if that makes sense to people, let's see what else we can get through here. All the rest now are significantly lower. We're already at as well, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things, 7 things that we have. I don't know how big we think a reasonable list is, but like, I guess from people looking at what's here, is there anything that
What
we
single
would make our
binary?
next one? So go ahead.
What is single binary?
If I understand correctly, is being able to like ship something as a single binary instead of having to like package node and some other files.
Boxed node, basically.
Yeah.
Kind of. There's some complexities more than box node,
You're
so-
right. Yeah.
but yes, similar to box node, the ability to generate a single binary. Doing so for people and requiring them to install a full compiler chain might not fall into scope for it. Yeah, that's a discussion.
I think that's fair.
The one that I would like to talk is the permissions policies. This is, for me, one of the key questions of technical direction, if we should be doing this or not.
So I have strong opinions here. In
Oh, I know
particular,
you. I know you have.
yeah. So I think right now, yesterday even, I saw a video claiming that Node was not secure. It is never secure by default. And this was by a security researcher at a university giving a talk. And he was stating that Dino was secure. And why did he state this? Because they have a permission system in place, essentially. The claim wasn't that Dino's permission system is without fault, but simply by having it, it invalidated, even from consideration, that Node could have any kind of security associated with it. I think this is one of the few times where we need to have a actual thought on shipping a version of Node that is locked down by default. And that is a complex question. There's different ideas of what permissions even mean. So things like Dino, for example, which was being hailed as a very lockdown system, suffers from prototype pollution attacks on its core. And so you can actually go and load a third-party module and basically get access to the file system anyway if part of your program does. Node has a policy system in place, but it doesn't constrain the actual APIs of core. It only constrains module loading. And I think the policies work fine for what they do. I don't think that they're good because there's no default policy. There's absolute permissions by default. And we could really take a look at this, and even just shipping a second binary like node.js, like that by default is locked down, would be great to me, at least. And I think we should look at this. It's probably higher priority to me than some of the things we've talked about. But that's a personal discussion. So that's it for me.
I get really concerned about doing multiple distributions and like the complexity of that we get into, one as maintainers, but also two as like people who have to explain it to the ecosystem. If you could go to like some random person who is a JavaScript developer and try to like meaningfully explain the difference between the two, that I really struggle to see that being easy or good for end users in that way.
So I think it's the same problem with HTTP versus HTTPS. I mean, explaining the difference is still something you have to do. Just because we're required to explain it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad.
I also think that there's a like the difference of, I mean, maybe this is my theoretical, how I'm thinking of what this implementation would look like. The difference between HTTPS and HTTP isn't immensely complex, whereas with the runtime, I think it's a much harder thing to explain.
I'm like, I sort of get if it's worth doing, then whether it's hard to explain is kind of secondarily in my mind. Like, if we suddenly, one concern I just wanted to say is, like, if we do say that we support a tighter security model, we're gonna need to be pretty sure that we can meet those expectations. And maybe that comes back to the, maybe some of the explanation part, like, can we explain what we are willing to support versus not effectively? Because it's going to be very hard to be like, yeah, turn this on and you're just safe, right?
That is never going to be the case, because any useful program uses a dangerous API. You're talking to the file system, you're talking to standard in, standard out. You're doing something.
Right. And we already get a number of, vulnerability reports, which in the end, a number of them, it's like, our model is that the code you're running is trusted. Therefore, we're not considering this a vulnerability. We don't have to, turn around a patch. If it's we'd want to be careful to set the expectations so that we don't now have a number of those coming in where people were more reasonably should have had a better right expectation or would more easily have thought that they should have been covered, I guess is the. But
Yeah,
we're sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and this is a complicated thing. We've tried to create a few documents on security models for Node. In general, you have to use scoping to discuss this. And so you can declare things like a misconfigured file, a misconfigured policy for permissions is considered out of scope for our security model. So you have to properly configure it is basically what you're stating. One fear is how hard it is to configure something. When people set up HTTP servers, when they generate keys and certs and stuff like that, that can also be a struggle. You have to generally put in extra configuration whenever you're doing these security things, but by having it basically be inert by default, just nothing, you can't, it's essentially, it makes Node worthless by default when you run in this mode. But it means that you have to go and expose the things that you want incrementally. This makes people feel a lot better. I'm not going to say that this security model is good because I definitely think things where you're blanket enabling things, particularly via the command line, is super dangerous because you're giving access to your whole application, all the permissions.
It's such a bad model. It's so bad. It's
but at the same time, we already have a system in place around loading and manipulating the loading to give constrained forms of APIs. So we really can take a look at that and adding guards to our actual, bindings to syscalls, and we could be in a decent place, I believe.
So I'd say if we step back to it's not easy, but the question is, do we think it's key to the success of Node going forward? That could, that doesn't matter whether it's easy or hard. It's like, do we think it's important that we think we make it a priority to look at permissions policies tightening, I guess, like a tighter security model than we currently have?
From a competition point of view, yes.
yes, I agree.
Okay, so that's kind of like, so that sounds like if we ignore this, then it may affect our success going forward is what I just heard.
Yes.
If the question is, sorry, go ahead, Mateo, I apologize.
No worries. I wanted just to say that we need to have something. Okay. To be honest, most Dino applications are, run at a very high permission anyway. So
right.
They need to be clear.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Okay. So it's
so absurd.
Not so there are certain things like I was discussing recently of some use case of Node. Okay. And one of the problems that we had was that we have require in order to do a thing, it needs to access the file system. However, we cannot mount, this is another point, FSOOX, and we cannot mount a fake require tree to make an application, run on top of a zip file or a tarball, for example. And this is some stuff where having some level of permissions, and it's some of these things, I understand the case where like the Dino security model makes sense, but they're very narrow. But even saying something like, hey, we have a security system, we are secure, it's even though very few of our users will use it. So it's, to some extent, it's marketing.
It's basically there's actually already a really good example of this, and it's top level 08. We shipped top level 08 after Deno did, but the implementation of top level 08 that we shipped was more complete, from what I understand. And we, we got criticized for like, oh, you're finally shipping top level await, which it's like the person who proposed it is in Node. Like, what do you? I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, this is going to be a thing, and that's fine. Honestly, I see this as positive that there is now competition in the runtime space, and that there's features that are basically getting validated for free for us.
Yeah.
In like
Oh.
people clearly care about this, whether or not it actually is good. And they can shoot themselves in the foot with it if they want. I just want to kind of rewind slightly into Bradley's point about Node.js. I agree. I think that's the correct model. I think this further exemplifies the need for a official version manager, but I'll not get into that here.
So one thing we do see is people are starting to pick up and look at Node for security features. We did have some Microsoft, we're about to get a PR from Microsoft for OS integration with one of their integrity APIs around policies. So I think just having something for these researchers to kind of poke and prod, even if it's experimental, is going to become more common now that we have competition. Yeah.
How do you see this in affecting the matrix? Do we just rebuild, like, do we just effectively double our matrix?
Which matrix are we talking about?
The build and support matrix.
I think, yeah, it's really all that you're doing is you're inserting, if it's this custom stripped down build, turn on the policy file with an empty JSON. That's it. It's just like insert some curly brackets in a specific location in core. That's it. That's the actual change.
I mean, do we need to do, can we like, I don't know, I guess I won't get into implementation.
Yeah, we're
details.
gonna get dealt like how we do it and what we do it and whether we have multiple builds or not, like that.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're agreed that permissions, policy, security models. So basically something where we working Node towards having more features that will help people constrain on the security front is key to the success going forward.
Yeah.
We'll still need to figure out like what are key things we would want to do to support that, but like that is a thing, it makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, so I would add that in. We can maybe in the last very few 5 minutes, we could talk about the ordering of them. But are there any others from the list that we should sort of pull out and add to that list that we have?
Not in the short term, but I do want pre-compilation. People are going to the extreme now, apparently, and compiling a JavaScript VM into WebAssembly just so that they can get pre-compilation for some situations.
Oh, and pre-compilation is that related to like being able to ship as a single binary or separate from that? Like
it's pretty separate. It's the ability to not have runtime parsing and compilation done.
Okay,
you
right.
start up right before you need user input, basically.
Right. Is it related to, I know there's some like the snapshotting and stuff work going on. Is it related to that or different from that again?
Can do it. Snapshots can do it, but that's complicated. We're in a better place for userland snapshotting than we were previously, but I don't think it's going to be in the short term realistic. I think there's more like four years down the line. But people can already do it by compiling V8 or SpiderMonkey into WASM and then shipping the whole thing on top of Node. And that does exist in the wild to get a faster startup time.
Okay.
That actually raises a different thing that I think we should care about that's on the horizon. That's a pre-Dena thing, but I don't like, or like as impactful as Deno, but before, like, it hasn't happened yet. But I don't think you have time.
So I'm just looking at a few others, like single binary is fairly high, worker thread support.
Sorry, what is to add to worker thread?
That's what I think. I'm thinking too,
It's
like
to
it's,
work with a debugger.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you currently cannot inspect worker threads. So I actually shell out with post message to the main thread to do console logs.
Yeah, I use process.row_row debug. So yes, I see the experience here is not nice. Okay.
so that would be like that. I can see that's a specific thing. I don't know if that means it should be in the list as a.
There are a few other things like if the main thread is blocking, you can't actually write to standard out. Like there's just a variety of things.
I got a solution, some solution to that, Bradley. I can send you. We are doing some crazy stuff in
No, but
around.
this is I can work around it. I'm talking about the common user of
Yeah.
Node.
Yeah, like would it be that you know, better multi-thread support might be the generic thing is crucial to forward success.
I would say something like that. Yes. It's probably not the API currently is fine, but it's missing something on the edge to makes things good. Like I can show you some of the modules that I built on top of our current API and the shenanigans that I had to do to make something worthwhile using, and it was pretty hard.
Okay, so I'm going to put better multi-threaded support. I'm going to say fix some worker thread issues, and then you know, some use cases are still hard, right?
One of the problems that I have found is that if you want to use console log after the main thread is done, has finished running, the output will not be printed.
Right.
For example, to classify the problem that Bradley said, I'm going to pass a link to the shenanigans that we had to do to get this.
And there are just some other things like passing FD around and stuff.
Yeah.
Right, okay, so that one I've added to the list. Any others that sort of jump out as, you know, just because it's not on the list doesn't mean it's not important. I think we can share like the whole set of things that people highlighted, but like from the list, here's the things we think should be specifically called out as like, you know, we want some focus on to maximize the, you know, success going forward. Because a bunch of these other things are still interesting. It's just we can't have everything on the list. So
I know. Okay, so one of my the single binary stuff, it's so would be so much interesting, especially if it can give a significant performance, lower bootstrap time for the application.
Agree.
Like
Huge agree.
it's you know, it's if we can deliver, like make it that we can, you know, tap into some special magic that would I don't know, pre-compile the code, preload it, load it from an area of memory that's actually faster to load instead of file system. Again, when you do all the requires, you know, it's actually a lot of work just loading a node.js app. So.
So we
it's,
used to have a bunch of that with our third-party main support, and I know I used it at one of the companies I worked at. And yeah, it is faster.
Yeah, so that's what it can be a solution even for companies going serverless, for example, or
Yep.
other things like that.
It's certainly interesting from the, hey, I just have a single binary, like the packaging distribution side.
Yes, it enables new apps like the Electron kind of experience. I don't know. But on the other end, can we live without? That's a question. It's.
I think we
If we
can
need
live
to-
without. I think we can live without it, but more and more we're seeing that this is a thing that is getting to the point of the permissions policies stuff. Like, I think Deno does this like by default, right? This is like how Deno works: is you ship a single binary.
No, it's not by default.
Oh, so okay, sorry, I thought it was by default. I don't know. I try not to use Deno. Yeah, so Deno can do this. So if you want to look at it from that same model of marketing,
So
that
the
exists.
problem, this is complicated. The way Deno does it can't be signed properly. So the one nice thing about how Boxnode does it is it does it during the compilation step. And during your, full compilation toolchain, you can get proper operating system signage. So you could put it in an app store or package manager as a single file.
Earlier, Bradley, you said you'd prefer it if we didn't do it that way, though.
I would prefer that a user not have to install a compiler chain. I don't necessarily think decoupling it with compilation is a good idea. I just don't want a user to have to set up, how to compile Node in order to create this.
Yeah. So
It
just
could be
have
done
create
as a
the single-
server.
have
to
us
create
do
the-
that for them.
To create the single binary, or because I think you'd possibly need the compilers to create your single binary, but once that was created, you shouldn't need the compilers anymore, right?
You do. I don't think there's any way to put stuff. Well, if we had like an ELF interpreter and we could rewrite the data section of it, no, but then you'd still need the signing tool to work with it. It's just, I just want people to either use a service or have a single binary that will let them do it. I don't think it necessarily needs to be Node because I don't think this is a typical use case to generate single binaries. But I don't think they should have to install everything under the sun in order to make /configure and make work, which is what they would need to do essentially for Boxnode.
Okay, I was thinking though that for me, the interesting part is that once you built it, you can distribute it easily. You can, and from Mateo's comment that if it can start and run faster, I wouldn't have been worried that you actually have to work a little harder to do that.
So no, we have a 2014 talk from me about this where I did it using third-party main. If you want to go look at it, it's from Entire.js. That's based off of zip architecture. So as far back as then, we were still doing it, and we did that at a startup.
I mean, how easy? I guess, yeah. You're saying how easy was it? But like installing a tool chain, like on Linux, yum install.
I'm not concerned about a
XYZ.
Linux user. Let's start with that. I have no concern for a Linux user with this.
Or even on OS X, it's not hard, right?
I would argue it is hard to get my Python these days to properly work.
Python is a pain everywhere.
The rest is fine. The rest is very easy. But like, I could not do a deploy to AWS earlier this week because it's Python. AWS's Python virtual environment had something happened to it. So even though I had Python installed properly, there are toolchain problems with Python.
Okay, I think we're getting in the weeds a little bit again. So maybe we'll put the single binary on the list for now. And I think we'll need what I propose is we take like a 20-minute break, if that's okay, or 15 or 20-minute break, come back, then talk about the second part, and then in the third part we'll review this list again to kind of like say, is everything on that list what we want to be on the list, and come up with the next steps and actions. Does that sound good for people?
Yep.
So if we can all come back, I'm going to leave the stream just running as opposed to closing and getting everybody back. So if, do we want 15 or 20 minutes? What do we think is best?
I think it doesn't matter. You can just go ahead and pick
Okay.
one.
Okay, let's say it's 2 minutes after. So let's have everybody back here at 12:20.
Roger that.
Okay, so we will see. I'm just going to stop sharing for a little bit, and we'll see everybody back in a few minutes. Thanks.
Are we still live? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Hello.
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 Let's see, maybe we just got to figure out if we've got pretty much everybody back. I won't ask who's not here because that won't work, but maybe can people put their hands up in the and for who's here, and we can see that way.
Michael, you're not here?
I don't think I can put my hand up. As the chair, I don't have that option. Okay, we have most people, so we're down to, let me see here. Everybody's back for other than 2, so I think we're almost 25 minutes after. Other than maybe Beth, are you here? Oh yeah, I see Beth's hand back up. Okay, so I think everybody's, we're all but 2 and we're 25 minutes after, so we probably should get started. Let me just find the link for the next section, and I will share that in the meeting intro. So actually, I will just quickly share. I'm going to share the link for the doc for minutes to start with, that one. And I'm going to open it up as well myself. And then I will just briefly share this presentation just because it's got a few things for thoughts. So let me do that. So let's go back here. Oops, sorry, just navigating to that. So this was the agenda that we had for the next session. I think we're a little behind, so maybe we'll try and keep this one to say 50 minutes. We'll see how that goes, but it was covered in this particular issue to start with, and really it's everything we want to talk about in terms of what the next 10 years should look like for collaborators. So things like contribution workflow, consensus seeking model, leadership model, really anything that we think is important to ensure success going forward. So in that sense, do people have, anybody want to jump in with the sort of things they think are particularly important that we should start off discussing? Maybe if nobody's jumping in, we can just start with the ones that are listed there. Like,
I have a very narrow topic to add.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Which is and we talked a little bit about this in our call yesterday, whatever. But the composition of the security triaging and generically, how do we make sure that Node.js is secure?
Right.
By
Okay.
not having in the sense of not shipping vulnerabilities. So and that's something that I would it's part of our leadership model and responsibility to some extent, and I don't know, I think it's something that should be on the table, and or now I from my point of view, it's something that we should change. Considering I am one of the people that's doing the heavy lifting on that. I think
that's a good one to cover under the leadership model. Because it's kind of tied to it, and we could go different ways. Like, does it make sense that it's tied to it? And we could say no, or we could say yes. And if yes, it might mean we have certain expectations, that kind of stuff. So, okay, so I added that under the leadership model. I don't know. Do we want to start in terms of the order that was there, like contribution workflow, or do we want to start with one of the other ones? We're probably going to have to time box them because I think we could probably discuss quite a lot on any one of them. And maybe like, do we think these, what we want to do is like, what's the key thing for ongoing success? So is there anything beyond these three things that we should talk about in that context? Like, you know, is there a really big problem that somebody sees that we need to make sure we address in terms of contributors? You know, and or the experience for collaborators? Like, what's the most important things that we talk about on that front?
I think part of it is we need to make sure we maintain the level of contribution we have across the board, or increase it, hopefully, but specifically in certain working groups as well, we need to make sure that we're always covered. And whether that means making sure it's a nice experience for the people we have, or making sure that it's easy to bring new folks on when people's life changes and they have to move on or dedicate less time. I think it's both of those we need to keep up.
I also think that the latter part has an additional component. Oh, sorry, Bradley, you have your hand up. I apologize.
It was just left up from earlier.
Oh, okay, sorry. I think the latter part of what Beth said has an additional component there, which is we're all gonna die someday. Like we're not gonna be doing this forever. Whether it's we retire, we get hit by a bus, or there's some tragic air collision with all the collaborators on it when we're going to collaborators, something. Making sure that people can continue to contribute, and like there are people who succeed us, or succeed. I think that's the right word. Succeed. No, whatever. Anyway,
it's not succeed. It's succeed.
Yeah,
is
succeed.
like
okay. Yeah.
Like
yeah.
succeed is like
Just
break
leave.
off. And
Yeah. Succeed just sounds like success, which is
Yeah.
it's why my brain's breaking. But yes, we have, you know, at least I've noticed that we have pulled in less people into leadership than we had previously. And I'm concerned about that for the longevity of the project and for the perpetual motion of it to continue working. Like largely the people who are largely, not wholly, but largely the people who are in leadership now were in leadership 4 years ago. And that's concerning to me, that we're not, you know, adding new people. And I think that's something that kind of ties into that last point of what Beth said. Like,
okay,
you know,
that's a good one.
Yeah.
So I guess it's we could start with that in terms of like maintaining the current level of contribution. I guess is there also an element of like making it people like to maintain that we need people who have time to be able to contribute. And how do we promote that? Like, because I think some people struggle with like they'd like to contribute more, but they don't have time in their jobs or roles, or right, like that I think in my mind is a blocker for some people.
I think I've seen, sorry, Matteo, you unmuted. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to make sense. I apologize. I think that we are the only open source project I've seen that's focused on that as much as we do. And I think there's other things we can do that kind of make that a not problem. Like there are absolutely people who want to, but there's other things we can do to just enable the people who do have that time. And I think it's fine to work on, you know, figuring out how to enable that, you know, people to get that time. But I don't think that's the primary blocker. Like there's people contributing to other open source projects, right? And like people are starting in other open source projects and kind of getting into leadership in other open source projects. So I don't necessarily believe that that's the biggest blocker we have, is we can't find people. There aren't people who have time. I think that those people exist. We're just not creating the incentives for them to contribute to Node.
That would be an interesting one for me. Like a lot of other projects that I see, even within the foundation sometimes have a fairly strong contingent from one or two companies. So like what would be a large, open source project that you think is doing better that we might look at as an example?
Babel, Webpack, Electron is a good example.
Is Electron a good example? Most of the people there, I think, are from
Slack and Microsoft. Yes.
Right. And they're actually paid to contribute, right? And
right, but there is a number of other people who come in who are stakeholders, who participate actively. Like there is a majority group, but then there are a number of people who are just as active in their own roles, who like it's not a team of people, it's a single person who come and contribute, and because because their company cares about Electron, right? Or because they care about Electron as well.
Right. And I guess it's like that was back to the do we have enough companies supporting their contributors and coming? I was just wondering if that was an issue we should think about, but maybe take your example of Babel. Like they that's an example you think where they're doing some things we're not, which might pull in more contributors.
From what I've seen, yeah, like they're pretty good at lifting people up and enabling them to contribute and getting people in. Yeah.
Okay, so we could look at things like that, like if they have practices or any of those practices, things that would make sense. Or
that I don't know. I don't know if they're codified. I don't know if there's a document with the practices that they follow. But they're better at it than we are, I think. I mean, even even Deno got a bunch of people involved and interested, right?
I'd have to go look at how numbers compare in terms of, it's easier to go from 3 to 5 than 100 to 200 or whatever. But
well, but see, the other thing there is like how active are those people? Like the two additional active people might be more active than the additional 100 making a single commit.
that is a like that hits on in something that might fit into this as well, is like, do we want to for the next 10 years for collaborators, is that environment, like what are the focuses of that environment? Is it for fewer more active contributors, larger number of less active contributors? That would be an element of this discussion as well, right? Sort of what's the shape of what we think will help lead to success and make it a place people want to contribute to, and at the same time help us to move forward and be successful.
One of the things that is Babel and Webpack have done, which we haven't, is there is money available to pay contributors.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to bring this up, but I think it's part of the leadership model. This is weak. They are part of the foundation and they do this anyway. So there are rules and check marks and everything, but they do it. So could we get some funding that way and to sponsor some people? I don't know. Okay. I am just at this point in time, there is no there's no path for a company to pour money directly into Node.js development. Now, I don't know if that's something we want to do, but
Right, except for you can commit your people, but you can't say here's X dollars to fund a person.
yes, exactly, or a feature, okay, or even like saying, okay, let me be. I know I'm going back to something very something very weird, but I would like to put a pot of money towards loaders because we
Right.
need it. And at this point in time, the path to do that is significantly hard.
Right.
So I don't know if there is an answer to this. I'm just making it visible from a,
Right. And I guess we'd want to, like, that would be a, you know, we'd want to, as a project decision, to say, does that actually make things better or worse, right? Like, it's like, I'm sure we, you know, but that's interesting. I think, you know, we should be looking at everything, right? Like, you know, it's kind of like what will make us successful going forward. And if there's dollars that aren't being spent in the project because there's for some reason that might be spent, you know, we want those dollars to support the work that's going on.
Paris, you have your hand up?
Yes, I guess we've never really done a good job because of how Node.js was started pre what I would say the Kubernetes excitement, right? Right now, a lot of money is being poured into in that ecosystem, right? Because they have the landscape, they have the cloud native foundation, there's a lot of excitement there. And even though we're a backbone tool around serverless and other containers and everything, we're not being marketed, I guess, or presented in the same level as, for example, even, you know, PostgreSQL Server, which is just as old as Node.js, if not older, if you know what I mean. So I think people are just used to our ecosystem the way it is, and we haven't really presented how we're actually part of a larger ecosystem and that they should take the same percentage of investment in it as they should. But that's just my thought and my impressions as somebody that sits on the outside.
I definitely have some thoughts on that. I spend a lot of time thinking about this because of my job and the intersections of, like, you know, I sit on a team that half of my team contributes upstream to Kubernetes. And I also like work a lot with the CNCF and the Linux Foundation and other standard like stuff like that. I think
I didn't mean to cut you off, but what I'm really thinking about is not Kubernetes per se,
Yep.
but if you look at the whole ecosystem all around it, how there's a lot of investment going on, right?
Yep.
Right now, this investment is where the intersection between security and that is playing, is sort of taking on for the last 2 or 3 months to me. So my question is, but even though every company uses Node, it's not considered in the same light.
so. Yeah, and that's what I was going to address. Is there? I think there is a very specific reason for that, and that it is that the CNCF is effectively the npm registry of cloud native. Or like whatever you want to call it, like all the stuff that falls under that scope, that is the registry. And because it's not something that you can just publish to, but you have to have, there's processes and stuff around it. And it is a neutral, air quotes, neutral body, and money is involved with it. It incentivizes money to be applied to those spaces. And I at this point, I genuinely don't think that at least the JavaScript ecosystem, maybe not exclusive to all ecosystems, but I think the JavaScript ecosystem at least cannot ever attain that same structure because of how we've already structured ourselves. And we will always be living in some percentage or some margin of that funding. The other thing there is like Google and Microsoft and Amazon and IBM and Oracle can all directly monetize these things. Like they're all directly monetizable. Node.js and JavaScript is not. Fundamentally, you cannot directly monetize JavaScript. The exception to this is like serverless. But even Docker containers, you're just getting into the same thing as Kubernetes, right? Like you're getting into that ecosystem, and so then Node and JavaScript doesn't matter. And so that's why there's able to be such investment in those tools and not necessarily in JavaScript, or at least that's my experience.
The other question I just have, and it's just a sidebar on it based on what you're saying, is how do we improve the visibility of Node.js and this ecosystem and the JavaScript ecosystem within the cloud native landscape period? Because right now, if you just think about NoSQL and SQL, right? That is something that you can see and identify resources in the cloud native ecosystem if that's where it is, but I don't really see JavaScript, Node, or TypeScript, or Dart, or any of those. It's just, I'm not trying to create another problem. I'm just saying, we need to be able to figure out how do we create cross visibility where we're part of these other ecosystems. How do we do that? And if we can do that. And then that may help us get more traction in our system. It's just a thought. Again, I'm not sure if what I'm saying makes sense.
Makes sense.
It's a good point to call out that like there's a successful example. I mean, back to Mateo's point of like, do we think we would get more collaborators? So, this section is like for collaborators, like one, would we get more collaborators if there was like a pool of dollars that people could, do work for? And what would the overall collaborator base feel? How would they feel about that?
I would be surprised if anyone gets upset that people are getting paid to work on Node. Perhaps my perception is off there, but like I can see I have heard people make assertions around direct funding as employees and like sponsoring employee time or sponsored employee time as the best way or the most effective way to contribute to Node right now. And like the path forward, basically, like people have made that assertion, and I think that's valid. I also don't think it should particularly exclude this avenue. I think this avenue is something that we could and should pursue. I also think it's rather at odds with the model of the foundation. So that's, I foresee challenges with that, as there have been challenges in other projects as well with this. So that's one thing. But
it's already possible. Like there was some work at the board level, and there is a policy that says, like, to get money to a particular project in the foundation, you need to join the foundation, and then you can contribute a certain amount based on like what level you've joined. So if a company wanted to direct 100% of their funds, it's not set up for that. But if a company wanted to say, we've joined the foundation and we want to then say donate specifically to Node some percentage, they could do that.
The problem with that is that they don't go to in the pockets of collaborators.
Yeah.
Like the difference here between this model and, for example, Babel, is that I know for sure that Babel have a few people that is getting 100+ K of money every year to work on Babel. And I'm not sure, like, is Babel more important than Node, less important than Node? I don't want to enter that discussion, but they are definitely, they are way more self-sustainable than what we are. The minimum.
I mean, the one caveat I'd put on that is like, you know, being close with people who are in that group of people who are getting paid. It's not, I would say it's random that they're getting that much money. Largely because, like, if you look at my browser crashed trying to open their Open Collective, but like there was some donation from a crypto company that was like $200,000. It was just a one-time thing that they just poured 200K into it. And like, then, you know, the next year that money, that 200K is gone. And so like they have to kind of keep doing that. The other thing there is that like a non-trivial amount of time, there's been criticism around this, a non-trivial amount of time ends up investing in getting money into that fund, like into that pool. You have to do work to do that, right? Like you have to spend time and effort getting people to agree to give you money. And then the optics of that are that you're not doing as much work, and that's not necessarily good. Like I don't agree with those optics, but that is the optics of it. And so that, yes, there's challenges with that model as well. And I think it is still a model we should explore, and partially because we can help normalize it in the ecosystem. I think that this model is not going away. And helping enable it is something that is potentially positive, even if we fail at doing it, and here's why. Like taking that failure on as a project at our size is totally fine.
So I'm gonna say again, like we did on the technical one, we're not going to solve this, get into all the details, but we could add to our list of priorities things we think that are important priorities for the next 10 years of success. Is one could be like ways of getting funding to collaborators. And, you know, we can then, you know, later on delve into like what the different ways, how we would do that, and prioritize versus other things that we might come up with. Does it make sense to do that and then move on to other things that might be priorities in terms of the next 10 year on the collaborator front?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, that was a good one. So Bethany had also said maintaining level of contribution. Is that a separate topic? I guess that really is, right? So maintaining level of contribution. I would put into that like, which I think Tierney mentioned, which was a succession planning.
I mean, not necessarily succession planning, but just making sure we're adding contributors and not just retaining the exact same ones that we've had. Like we're all gonna stop contributing to Node at some point. What happens when we all stop? Yeah, but I like the succession. I'll if that's not what you meant, I'll put it in that's something I think would be important for us to look at in terms of like. It's exactly what you're saying. Like we're not all going to be here. We don't want the project dependent on any one person or any one small set of people. So what do you do to make sure people are sort of joining and finding their roles, and so that when one person leaves, it's not a big deal, right? Yeah. In terms of maintaining level of contribution, I guess that's a large area. I don't know, is there things that we should dive into that, or like we don't have, you know, maybe we're still more at the brainstorming level here. So maybe it's worth leaving that as that and, you know, talking about other topics to see what comes up. Does that make sense? Or
just on the contributing, sorry, I think it could be also great to think to find a way to involve company. And I'm not thinking about tech company like Google, Amazon, and every kind of company. I work for an insurance company. I use Node.js every day. But just trying to find time and to, let's say, justify to have some time to attend meetings or do and write code outside of the core business of the company is always hard. At least in France. So I don't know. It's the same. Maybe it's on the different level in different countries, but it also could be a way to try to attend, as different company will use different part of Node.js. So maybe some company will want to involve people and maybe also have a way for people to, I don't want to say sell how to do it, but some kind of processes and let's say a feedback or some kind of return of investment for the company to help the runtime to evolve or something like that. I'm not really sure.
That aligns with what I was kind of trying to poke at earlier. Like, for people who want to contribute, is there something that we should be thinking about, can be doing to help them? Like, if it's not strictly we talk about other problems, like, it's hard to get involved because documentation or technical issues, but like another one is just like, can you get time from your company to do it? I think that's what you were just saying, right?
Yes.
And maybe that even comes under the maintaining level of contribution. Like,
yeah, I was thinking about that because maybe some company will use exclusively Node.js as a serverless and with just HTTP calls. So they only want to be involved in, let's say, the HTTP part and don't really care about the CLI or just something else.
I always wonder, like, how can we motivate companies to see that it's in their benefit?
I wonder if us just having this list of future priorities might help with that. If they can see something like odors or better diagnostics on our roadmap of things we care about and things we're trying to push forward, I think that might help convince them because they're things they probably need.
So I definitely agree with that. I mean, I've been asked internally at Microsoft before, like, what's the roadmap for Node? And I have to say there isn't one. And I explained that, but that's disheartening to certain folks. It's also challenging for certain folks who are in, say, a serverless space, who, something major coming down the pipeline is going to impact how they're able to serve their customers. And I end up helping them, but that's a thing that happens. One of the things I will say is, I think, like, when you're talking about convincing a company, you have to convince a person. You have to convince either an engineering manager or a VP of engineering or some level of engineering. This is a valuable thing for you to do. And I think one of the things I think we've not done a great job at is figuring out who those are and how we need to do that. And I think we have a base of people who, one, we've already done that with, and we could go talk to and say, what was convincing for you? Like, we can go get that information. And two, we have a base of people who that's not been a successful thing for, and we can go ask them why. Like, I'm sure, I know there was at some point, I was talking to someone at Capital One, and they have 5,000 node devs, or had 5,000 node devs. I don't know if they still do. That was 4 years ago or something. Kind of wild that they are spending 5,000 people on Node, and one, the project doesn't know about it. Two, they're not contributing. Like, that's a kind of like, that is the case of someone like in the CNCF that would be like actively contributing if there's 5,000 people investing in Kubernetes, right? So that kind of thing is something that, we could go talk to them and say, hey, why didn't you contribute? What did we fail at doing to get you involved? And I think that there's going to be multiple companies like that, right? Like I know, and I'm sure other people who have worked in services in this call know all of the companies, or many companies that have a large node investment that don't participate. So I think that's something we could potentially do better with.
Okay, so I've added that. A couple notes. One is like a clearer technical direction might help, and two, that we need to convince a specific person. And
I think it can also join. I think we talked on another call about why Node.js is a great technology to choose for one company. I think, if I remember right. So could be also the same, why contributing is an advantage to a company.
Right. So we need, I mean, that one is kind of like marketing resources as to why why should you?
Yeah, it would be between marketing and advocacy, I think.
I think the two things we've already, like, I'm actually rearranging a little bit. Like, it's sort of maintaining, growing the level of contribution. And that is like, then, ways to get funding to collaborators, succession planning, helping people from companies justify, make the case to have time to contribute. Those all seem related to me. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
Yep.
In terms of that specific thing, like, do we believe there? So since we're sort of diving into that, we got that list. I think part of the reason this was first suggested was like, are there things that we think we should do differently within the project that would help maintain, grow contributors, like technically? Or, you could say, oh, it's too hard to contribute, and so people come, then they get turned off and they leave. That's our major problem. Or you could say, well, to actually make a substantial contribution, you're going to have to spend some time, you're going to have to invest. And what we've got, while isn't perfect, shouldn't be the determining factor as to whether you're going to stick around or not. So I'm just sort of like poking at, do we think there's specific things in terms of like what you have to do to contribute that we would want to look at that would make a significant difference? And just to say, like, making it easier may or may not actually affect that.
One thing I do tend to see is we were very good at getting good first contributions, especially at like Code and Learns, but then the gap between going from one of those and finding something to get stuck into to contribute to off your own back is very difficult. And I think any work we can do to bridge that gap, to give people a bit more guidance to do the thing up from their good first issue, would help.
I guess my question is, how much does that have to be? Like, if it's a good second issue, does that now get us an ongoing contributor? Or is it, we have to get them a mentor, or, how much do you have to do? So
by experience in release, I'm pretty sure it's around 6 months of mentoring Miles gave me when I was onboarded, and then probably about the same when we onboarded the newer releases recently.
Right.
That was like an hour a week or an hour every 2 weeks for 6 months.
It was a mentorship program, Beth?
Not the formal one.
Oh,
no,
okay.
It wasn't a formal one. It was within the release group. We realized we could do more help, and we set up a program where people could shadow, join a group every couple of weeks and learn the process and then become releases.
Okay, because I see there is still meeting for the mentorship program and stuff like that, but I see no news on that. So if someone have input, I think it's pretty much dead, or maybe
no, it's been refocused, so that instead of like looking for mentees and then trying to match with mentors, it's the mentorship program has gone out to a number of groups. They did a presentation at the TSC not so long ago. But for example, I'll give you my experience. They approached the Node API team, and we worked with them to say, okay, like here's what would make some of the skills that somebody would want that would position somebody to be successful. They then went out and looked for mentees. They came up with some, kind of like an interview and found a good match. And then those people have joined the Node API team. We already had like a weekly meeting, so they come to that weekly meeting. We have an opportunity to talk to them, ask if they have questions. And so we're mentoring. We actually now have 2 mentees. So it's a much more targeted, small scale, like let's find people who are interested in committing, significant time over time. Like, it's not, I'm going to do my second PR. It's like, yeah, I'll come to your meet. I'll come and take on some tasks, come to the weekly meeting for months. And then, in return, the rest of the team mentors and works with them. And that kind of sounds similar to, what Beth did sort of informally. So I think the current mentorship program is targeted, possibly in alignment with what would work. We're not necessarily leveraging it in a lot of different places yet.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't aware of this change.
Yeah, it's
it
more
seems
of
to
a
be really
quiet.
effective.
Go ahead.
Sorry. It just seems to be really effective. Like it seems to be working well. They're doing a very good job.
So I kind of added to our list then of under the maintaining, growing the level of contribution, like targeted mentoring would be important to continue and grow if we can. Beth, does that kind of fit with what the point you were trying to make, or was it totally different?
No, that aligns, and it also kind of goes along with this succession, kind of making sure we can grow the working groups to where they're most effective kind of size.
Because I think if there's a group, we come up with this and we say this is important, it's something where I know the mentoring team has been trying to go out there and say, hey, anybody have somebody, anybody willing to mentor, but like it may be something that we can try and support more strongly, or talk about it as the next 10 group, like what can we do to support that mentoring initiative? Because I think they've got, like I said, the model seemed to have worked fairly well for Node API. From what Beth said, it kind of fit that earlier, the model that she found useful, but I think they're not getting as many groups coming to them and saying, yeah, we could use a mentee, we can support a mentee, right?
No, but like, let me make an example. I had a mentee once. The problem is the code base. So I had a mentee through the mentorship program, and I have mentored Robert Nagy, essentially, in the form of reviewing a ton of PR and explaining and doing a lot of things. So the reality is that in order to become a Node Core contributor at a certain level, you need to put a significant amount of time to get through there.
Right.
The code base is complex. Like, it's not easy to contribute, especially because you need to know a subsystem somehow. So, for example, if you want to contribute to HTTP, you need to have a very good idea of what the spec for HTTP 1.1 says.
Mm-hmm.
This is hard. Okay, we are talking about hard skills. On the other hand, if you're talking node streams, for example, you need to have been working with the stuff for a long time, and it's not easy to have those skills, like, simply put.
And I think that's where, like, I don't know who you had the example of Robert, and you said you had a mentee. Was that under the earlier mentee program, or?
I don't know if it's this one or the previous one. It's just that the person did not have enough time to do the work.
Right. I think that's the key thing, is like the expectation has got to be that the mentee is making a longer term commitment in terms of time, right? Because otherwise, you're right, it's not going to, like we don't have, I think our challenge is we don't have a lot of easy stuff.
No.
Or quick and easy, right? And I guess that's where part of the earlier thing is, like, at one point we did have a fairly big push on, let's try and get as many new collaborators, kind of like first PR landed, you know, and I think that was like, we get people interested, they're invested, but we could think about, like, does that actually work? And is that key to our future success? Or is it, we want to, you know, we need to focus our efforts on smaller number of people who will have more time, or because those are different approaches.
I mean, I think at least from a statistics point, we're pretty confident the code and learn thing is basically a way for us to solve a bunch of very easy issues and not a way to get maintainers. Like that seems to be the result of it.
We did get some. We got a few, absolutely. But out of like 300 at each event, it was like 2. Like that isn't really, like, that is not a return in like the way that I think we were hoping it would be. And I could be wrong. Maybe the expectation was not that, but like it was a very small number compared to how many people were actually showing up. And you can actually see it. I posted the links in the Zoom chat. You can see, I mean, you can always see the code and learn stuff in any kind of graph of our contributions. And that those people aren't ever retained, really. Which is, you know, that's fine. But I don't think that if we have to do that much work to get, like, you know, a handful of contributors, that's, I don't think the best or most effective way to exert that energy. Yeah, we could get into a long conversation on there's sort of 2 things you might get out of that. One would be the people who didn't stay as contributors might stay as node fans, but that's a separate issue than maintaining and growing the contribution level, like the contributors. So I'd say, again, just for time, we should leave on like targeted mentoring on that list. But I'm back to, like, are there other things into maintaining, growing? Like, is there something about our, you know, one of the things that was on this initial list was the contribution workflow. Is there something about the contribution workflow that we think would significantly change the level of and I don't want to say like active or contributors or whatever, but like the level of contributions that we get, and not strictly by like, hey, did they do a first commit? Because that may or may not. It's more like of meaningful contributions, I guess, is that, and I don't want to say non-meaningful, but I'm hopefully trying to say, like, you know, something which moves the needle on that front. Does the lack, I'll just, you know, make things that can be controversial out there, is the lack of anybody chiming up, say that, we're, you know, our contribution workflow we all think is okay. You know, obviously things can always be better, easier, but like there's not something that you can say, oh, well, if we change this, that's going to make a massive difference.
I mean, I have critiques, but also, you know, I'm not a core contributor, and it's not my place to critique it.
And it'll come back to, like, there'll be a critique of everything. It's like, is there something significant enough that if we said, hey, if we change this, we could grow our collaborators by 10%?
I think, honestly, just reducing the amount of work that has to be done to get code in would be would be a huge thing. Basically reducing the barrier to entry when something is like agreed upon. I think that would be positive, using something like Trop. backport stuff. I backport, like just basically reducing the pain in PRs is, I think, something that would be useful. It's something that I've seen people express frustration with many times. So
what's the I'm just trying to understand, like the backporting part. I think it's, and Beth can correct me if I'm wrong, the main issue there is if things don't land cleanly, right?
Yeah, I kind of feel, yes, the kind of like review process can be somewhat straining at times, and also be nice if things were a lot more automated, like we could click the merge button on GitHub. But those things for me are at least livable. It's really coming up with the new code that actually needs to be written. I don't see the technical kind of landing things. Yes, error repeating is what's limiting or bottlenecking our contributions. I kind of feel it's the lack of guidance to focus on what needs to be contributed, what areas of code they could look at, support in the code base, kind of like more good first issues or more guidance. I guess that's more for new contributors, though. I don't see it being a bottleneck for new contributors, but maybe for our existing ones, it's the frustration for that.
And I would like to add a slightly different topic as well.
Yep.
I feel a significant blocker for a lot of people is the fact that in order to start contributing to Node is a 10 to 30 minutes journey in which your laptop becomes a little stove. Sorry to be making it
right.
From most people will fail that step. Like, in order to make my life livable as a Node Core developer, I develop Node Core on a dedicated server.
Right.
Like, it's just like if you need to run Zoom on your machine and you want to compile Node at the same time, you can't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we have a large machine, and that makes it, reasonable to compile something, make progress without having to wait long enough that you've switched to something else.
Yes. It's like, I think the biggest barrier for contribution, that's the biggest barrier for contribution, rather than, like, I think people can live with the review, like the review stuff and so on and so forth, but every single time, the problem is every single time they came back to it, they need to rebase or do some stuff, and then they need to recompile V8, and then it's another 30 minutes, and we don't really tell people too much of, you should use Ccache because if you don't use Ccache, you're completely screwed. And there are tools to automate some part of this workflow, even like there's Goma, and there is other things that can possibly be done to to help sustain some of the devs. And it's like, I don't know, I'm everything else, it's this is, I'm putting it something meaningful here. Like I just want to say I'm paying money to have a server so that I can develop Node. It's because otherwise doing it from my laptop would be unfeasible. So
right, and I can see if you've got somebody who's like you said before, you need a fair amount of skills to be able to contribute and stuff. And if you've then, we might have people who are like have those skills, are willing to do it, but like an hour, 30 minutes waiting means that they're now switched on to something else, and then they don't come back. And so I could see that actually having a significant. The question is, do we think we can change the build time, or are there other things like, if we said can we get companies sponsoring large machines that people can log in and run their builds on, like a dedicated server, like you said, right? Like, does that make any sense? What are the different options we have for trying to improve that?
It's one of the options is to somehow ship some of the pre-built stuff as part of our daily CI or something like that. I don't know if that would be even possible, but some utility to kickstart Ccache or even just download the output of the build folder from our build servers.
Right. That would have to be on a particular platform. I'm thinking you could do something where like you built a Docker container. Like basically we could have a nightly thing that says, start up a container, check all the stuff out, build it all, and then save that container.
Sorry, I interrupted you. I apologize.
No, go ahead.
Wouldn't that still be platform specific to like whatever OS you ran in the Docker container?
Well, the Docker container would be Linux, but you could do development on that on your Windows laptop, on your OS X machine, on whatever, right?
I would say that investing some time into getting that some level of like I'm on a broad term reducing and improving the build time and the time needed for okay, let's call it the time to first commit or the time to commit.
I'm almost like the time to first run. So say I want to make a small change. I got to check out core. That takes a bunch of time. Then I got to compile the whole thing. That could take, on a small machine, that could take you 30 minutes. And by that point, like if you tell me I have to do an hour of work before I can start to do something, and I got an hour to do it, and then I come back, I don't finish it, so I come back to it the next day. Oh, I got to do it again. So yeah, I see your. I mean, and if we could make the build time to, super fast, that'd be great, but I'm not sure how practical that is. So
I'm not like, so the only way, so we cannot speed up what we have. We have a lot of things to build. The only way is that's already built and we download it.
Right.
And we can only need to support like 3-4 platforms. Like it's not that we need to support all of them. So it's, it's practically, if we just did this for Linux and Mac, we'll get a huge boost. Windows would be a huge, good benefit. These will be a huge boost, I think, for a lot of people that, wants to do a quick collaboration. There are other ways in which we can potentially improve some stuff. Like, I don't know, there is the GitHub spaces. There are, I don't know, I'm just saying it out loud, okay?
Well, and so the nice thing about if you do a Docker image, you can load if you have a dev container.json file in the repo, you can just load that as your workspace and code spaces. Like you can load the Docker image as that. So it makes it trivial. That said, I've built Node on both the basic, which these aren't exposed. I don't know if they will be, but like they're running on the same infrastructure as the ones that Code Spaces used to be Visual Studio Online. That doesn't exist anymore. It's just Code Spaces. The basic machine cannot run it. You cannot build Node. It literally crashes at 2 hours. Don't try.
I mean, if we tried, like if it was pre-built.
Yes.
So the key idea here
is that right. Yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, that completely cuts out my concern. Yeah, that's excellent.
So it's been checked out the night before and built.
Mm-hmm. So the date is done once by the machinery, and then if you want to do a quick JavaScript commit, okay, or a commit that does not touch V8 or any other of the C++ dependencies, even if it's just the node.js dependencies, it's actually simple to do those changes. It won't take a huge amount of time to rebuild them. Like
that makes sense. That's huge. Yeah, and that would also make, that makes a ton of sense. And I think code spaces also makes it very accessible for random people if they don't like have a VM that they can run it on.
Yeah, but it's like in generic case, so
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of ways in which this could be explored. I am just pointing out, putting it out to the into the ether. You know, it's I think if we want to improve to create a easier onboarding path, I think that would be it.
I agree. Huge agree.
Yeah, so I've added under the priorities, easier contribution workflow, with the main thing being local build time as a major blocker. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so from just looking at so contribution workflow, that was on the original list, and back to we can only do so many things. It sounds like we have one good concrete thing that we could say is the priority. Are there any other things that come to people's minds like that would make a significant difference? Okay, I think, well, we could leave that. So now consensus seeking model or leadership model, is there anything on those fronts that, like, for the next 10 years, like, do people find those frustrating? I guess I know that there is definitely, the answer is yes, but like, what would be priorities? What could we change or whatever that would affect the success going forward significantly? Like, how about I'll ask this, like, is there something about our leadership model that means that people don't join and contribute, or don't collaborate, or don't contribute as much as they could?
I mean, I think it ends up burning people out as they try to contribute. Like, we've seen this many, many times where people try to contribute and run into a stone wall to the point that they quit. I think that's a factor that happens. That's
on the consensus seeking model, right? Or the leadership model, or?
Yeah, that's consensus seeking model. I think leadership model does play into that. But I think it's largely consensus seeking model.
So go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to kind of add to that. We often see a problem where there is a consensus can't be reached in a particular subsystem, and that will get elevated to the TSC, but the TSC may not have the expertise in general to make the call on that particular subsystem. So it has to go back to the people who know the subsystem most. It seems to be a common problem we end up hitting.
Right. So that actually,
go ahead. No, go ahead, Michael. No, go ahead.
I was going to say that kind of spans both leadership and consensus seeking. Sort of like it's affecting consensus seeking, but it also is sort of like, that's because we've set our leadership is the TSC. So Matteo, go ahead.
Yeah, my problem, in a lot of cases, so the TSC as a group, it's an heterogeneous group of people with a wide range of skills. Typically, it's very rare that more than one people has skills on one area of Node. There are overlaps, but we got essentially a few people that have skills on HTTP and streams, and 2 people in there. We got a couple of 2-3 people that have skills on build and releases. We have we don't have, if me and Robert, we are in disagreement on some features that we need to get into streams, there is really nobody else to break that tie. And this is the case for a lot of other, we had an issue where the two people that know more about TLS were arguing about the TLS spec on an issue, and they were asking, well, the TSC should make a decision here. And just like, I don't have a month to study the TLS spec to
Right.
untie this decision. I don't know about you folks, but I don't have a month to dedicate to solving one specific tie. So
And-
just to,
Yeah, sorry, just to add, that's exactly what I've seen. And it's because the code base isn't simple to understand. It will take you an hour or so of reading the PR to even get enough to have a slight opinion. And sometimes it'll take even longer than that. And people just don't have the time to commit to learning the various subsystems where it's so complicated.
So what could we change to make that better? Like, I totally identify with that too. It's like, you know, some of your areas, you have a good opinion. The other ones, you're like, kind of trust the people who are the experts in that way. And then otherwise it's a good effort to get invested.
So from my point of view, it's, if we can just come at the conclusion of this and say, this is a problem that we need to open an issue on the TSC and discuss a change in our consensus seeking model to solve this specific issue, that would be already a incredibly good step forward. Like, again, we don't need to come to conclusions. We just, if we can just say we need to solve this problem, if we agree that this is a problem and we need to identify and solve this problem.
Right. Okay, so consensus seeking is sort of like how to find tiebreakers.
Yeah, well, that's, the TSC job as a tiebreaker is not doing well for my opinion.
Yeah, it's not working.
Well, I think it's worth a little bit, because one model is as TSC members, we commit to do that. And yes, it will take us a couple hours, but the challenge I think today is I'd love to do it for everyone, but I don't have time, right? So I pick and choose, and everybody else pick and chooses. And the problem I kind of see is we don't have a way to get the volunteer to do it in a timely way. But I'd be happy to commit to say, if we rotated, whenever my turn came up and we had this case, I would jump in and do it. Right. And that's a model. That's a model that says, everybody just doing it on their own, figuring out, we lead to this. Well, nobody wants to because they know that it's going to be a significant amount of effort to do it every time.
Yes, but also, it's, we have this concept of if case we need to do a vote.
Yeah.
And that mechanism that, it's not working from my point of view. Okay.
Right. So we could basically say that, on a rotation basis, we identify the person who's going to make the tiebreaker, and then that breaks the tie. There's no vote.
Yeah. Or if it's more than 1 people, 3 people. Okay.
Right. So exactly. We pick some alternate way versus just a straight vote. And I think to go along with it would have to be a commitment from the TSC members that they will, invest somehow fairly. We'll all each fairly invest our time to make those to support that, right?
Well, one of the bits is that we might think of having, having a specific area of core,
right,
attached to each. So we already have those. It's just not.
We do have that, yeah. The thing is with that one is the number of issues are probably not evenly distributed.
Yeah, but that also depends the number of the ties.
True. So yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
It's to be honest, if we need to have let's consider modules. Okay. Yeah. If we need to have a tiebreaker for modules. Yeah, Tierney says a tie queue. I love the concept of a tie queue, but that's constantly, it can be that I'm, We can just get something like that done.
What was
I
the
am-
Just have a
Tie
tie queue,
queue?
like a commit
Right.
queue where the TSC members are queued up and like you go in order and you loop. Because like if
Yeah.
I think to Mateo's point, like there's going to be certain areas that have more ties. There's going to be certain periods of time that have more ties.
But it does not, like, you might not have the right experience in that subsystem.
Yeah.
To break that tie. Okay. So that's the problem of of that. Okay, so you might just say, who is going to break this tie, and call for volunteers.
The other thing is, do we have code owners who, like, the TSC delegates you choose?
Well, I think it's what Mateo is saying is the code owners haven't been able to agree in these cases. Like, there's 2 of them, but they don't agree. What do you do? Because otherwise we pretty much do defer. Like, if there's the people who are in the different areas and they've got the most experience. So if they come and say, this is what we think happens, it just happens, right?
It's not just like that, because in some areas that he said, let's say that we have 5 people involved. One objects.
Right.
Okay. Now there is ask for the TSC to break the tie. Now, the 4 people that have said +1 on that.
Yep.
Have already expressed their opinion. So,
well, that we could make more formal as a, if these 4 people who are a code owner effectively could, if there's a majority of the code owners, then
yes,
you don't need to escalate to the TSC, right?
Yeah, again, I am. Well, we need to change this tie breaking mechanism. Okay.
Okay.
Like I would go as far as, let's go have a broader discussion with the rest of the TSC.
Yep.
Let's talk about how to improve our tie-breaking mechanism so that essentially one person that is objecting all the time,
right,
can block the progress of a working group, because the TSC cannot break those ties quickly enough.
Right. So improve the overcome objections is really the fundamental.
Yes.
Ties is one part of that only, really, like.
Yes, of course,
okay.
Yes. But improve, we need to make that process extremely swift. Okay. So to the point of, if the majority of the code owners agrees, everything goes through. That's, simple majority of code owners breaks a tie. Okay. Yeah, right. Like something like that. Okay. So I don't know. I'm putting it out loud, but it's it might
I
be
think that's
something...
a good one. Like that's like a good concrete priority under the consensus seeking model. And like, I think the next 10 group could come up with a proposal, right? Because sometimes concrete's like, here's how it could work. And then everybody can, go from there, shoot it down, so forth. Anything else like that on the consensus seeking model that jump out is? I think that's in terms of the leadership model. So, is the leadership model that we have today fundamentally causing less contribution, less, affecting the success as we go forward, that we could do somehow differently that would substantially change our chances of success and level of success? And I mean, today our TSC model has been like Mateo mentioned, it's almost by design that we have people from a broad range of areas, because we've kind of in some cases said, hey, let's bring on some people because they know these areas and can represent that. It's also very much intended, like the governance is around like letting the collaborators figure things out, and the TSC gets involved only when the agreement can't be reached, as opposed to making decisions ahead of time, charting the path, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of like the model we've used and adopted over the years. So is that we think that's still the right model, or is there something different that would let us be more successful?
I guess this is just an observation mine. It would be, I would have expected a larger overlap with the technical steering committee and this group, just by the nature of being in a leadership position, and the fact that we needed a next 10 group to sit and figure things out. I don't know if that questions our structure potentially. Would we expect the TSC to lead some more of these type of things?
Let me speak for myself. Like, mostly for me, it was, I cannot take another meeting in terms of workload. Like, it was like as simple as either that or the good TSC meeting. It's not, it's just the amount of
Time.
effort. It's just time. It's not lack of will. It's literally lack of time. And I made an effort today because it was a longer conversation and so on. And I'm hopefully in a position where I can have a little bit more time to dedicate to open source. So happy days, I'm doing it. But it's tough.
Along those lines, just thinking, you know, the current TSC meetings have a certain focus, which is like we've tagged the things which are the exceptions, the ones that people have said we need to look at. You know, we could shift the content of those meetings to be alternating between it's tagged what's there and future planning. I don't know if that makes it any better or any different, right? Like, because sometimes we don't have anything on the agenda, sometimes we do, but we specifically don't have on the TSC agenda, like, we go over the strategic initiatives just to see if there's something we can support that, but that's all we do on that front today.
Essentially, it's the role of the TSC right now is to resolve the consensus,
right,
when it cannot be resolved. Okay, and this takes some significant amount of time. Yep. If we can delegate a part of that activity to the group that are already making those decisions and formalize the fact that in order to resolve a thing, we are essentially delegating a smaller group to resolve that problem, that can free up other resources on the TSC members. I don't know. It's a lot of the discussions that we have are rehashing of the same stuff for a bit of time. Like, we have issues in the TSC agenda that has been going on for months. And
agreed.
It's, I don't know if you're making any good progress on any of them, because we cannot even ourselves break the ties. Like, we cannot break we do not agree between the TSC members, and we don't want to call a vote. Which is also something that we should be more often to some extent, like, you know, count ourselves and see how many people wants to do this and or reach some consensus. Like, a good example of this process that we are doing right now is probably with the primordials thing. It's just that we are created a small group, said, hey, you know, come up with a solution to this. Thank you.
Right, we currently spend more effort trying to see if we can reach consensus. It takes more time, and hopefully, you know, we come up with better solutions, but sometimes a lesser solution would be better if it was faster. So that's that, you know, so sometimes it might be, you know, we might say, well, sometimes we'll make the wrong decision, but if we make the wrong decision faster overall, that still might be better than spending, yeah. So that's kind of another area we could explore in terms of the tie breaking of like where that balance is between exhausting consensus and just voting and getting it done. But today our governance is really around like we try and reach consensus and get input versus a majority wins kind of thing. And I'm kind of like, for me, I'm actually not so worried about us voting faster than we are. but I don't like the pure majority wins part where people, like, if we have 50% of the people at a meeting, just because the 50% are in that one meeting and we take a vote, that doesn't seem quite right, because
No,
the
it's not.
other 50% might have had a really good point that would have swayed the other people, right? But yeah, that's a tough one to know the right balance.
You know, from my point of view, it's like, I think there is something to change in all of
Yep.
this. I think that message that we can send back to the TSC, hey, TSC, which is still a few of us are, there's a good
Yep.
overlap here in this meeting. So we would like to change our own governance to solve these specific problems. And can we? Okay, do you agree that those are the problems? And if you agree that those are the problems, you know, this will come in a change in our procedures and the rest, and we can take one step at a time. Okay.
Yep.
So essentially, do things slow, but yeah.
So yeah, I think that's nice concrete thing on consensus seeking, which is to look at that tie breaking, overcoming objections. From the leadership model, I think the one thing we could come out of this is to explore, you know, to Beth's point, like, should the TSC have more of a role in the future vision / direction?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to reiterate that as that exact question. Maybe that's a better way to frame it. Should the TSC be involved?
Right, like that's the thing that maybe we think coming out of this discussion is, like, if we were to change something on the leadership model, that would be the one that kind of maybe since we're the ones who are interested in the vision direction, it's self-serving, but like that's the thing that stood out to us, is like maybe we should be more involved in that. So. Okay, so we're actually past the time I was hoping we'd spend on this. So we're down to 15 minutes. What I'd suggest is that we try and close out on this. Maybe give people one last chance to call out anything specific that we think we should talk about this, and then use the last minutes to put together like our next steps, and you know, what we want to see coming out of the two sets of discussions. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so any last call for next 10 years of collaborators? Okay, if not, I'm going to paste in, this is the link to the last doc that I'd created. And that is where I think we can take notes in terms of our next steps. And I'm going to stop. I'm not sharing that, so that's fine. I'm going to move this over here, so that this we can see. I'm going to say okay to that. And I will share that so that we all see the same thing. So in terms of the technical priorities, we had ended up with, let me just find that doc, hold on. So here was, I'm just going to paste it in there. So we have it, there's the link to that doc. And in there we had, and I'm going to paste this in, but then I'm going to cut it down a bit, take out the comments and everything. This is what we came up with in terms of the priorities. Sorry, so it's taking a minute here to. This is not quite helping my. Oops. Okay, so I think this was the list of things we said was the most important. Did I keep all of those? Does that make sense? It looks to me like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That seems, sorry, I cut off a couple at the end here. And people do a check to make sure I've got everything, and then watch list. We had, actually no, I put the observability was in there. And the watch list should have been, okay, sorry. I just put that in totally the wrong place. The watch list was quick and sorry, just find the other one, and serverless. So does that look like, so that's our watch list, and sorry, our what came out of the technical priorities at the very highest level, and sort of next steps would be one, so to document, kind of like we have, I think, for the, like if you see the constituencies, we had the titles, we explained what they were, then what the constituency needed, we had a mapping between those. We could create a similar document which lists these and has some explanation of what they are. So would this be like a PR to node core with technical priorities? That sound like a good next step, or do we need to have some discussion, like an intermediate step within the next tech 10 repo to work on the list, or what do we think?
I think just PRing it is fine. I don't think we need to introduce more work around it. Like we relatively have this done. PRing it in and reviewing and editing if we need to there, but otherwise just going ahead and PRing is fine.
And that'll get us our next level of sort of collaborator involvement in terms of like, hey, what about this or that? And
yep.
Okay. Who all would like to be involved in doing that? I'm willing to volunteer as one of the people.
Yeah, happy to help.
Me too.
Same.
Okay. Come on, that was John, right?
Yep.
Jean, right? Okay, Jean. Okay. The next thing would be, I think it would be good to get, like, well, what do you think? I don't know. Like, do we think actually getting broader ecosystem input, like, if we PR that in and then we did a survey like we did for the constituencies, would that make sense? To kind of validate what we've done, or?
I don't know if a survey is going to be particularly helpful. I could be wrong. What do you want from the survey?
It's to, we've got a smaller group of people who have put this together. Some broader validation that we've got it close enough to write that there's no major gaps. Like, for example, the last survey helped us fill in a couple constituencies, a couple of needs that we didn't have. So, and the survey, the other thought that came is like, we could do a survey of the foundation members, or we could do a survey of companies, or we could do a survey of individuals. Like there are different places we could go and try and get that validation from. Or we could do nothing. So
I think if we do that, writing one survey and you can have multiple variants of the same survey, doing that would be good. And like asking the foundation to send it out, sending it out to collaborators, and then tweeting out a public one would be fine, I think.
Anybody else with comments? Is that a good idea? Mediocre idea? Do we think we need that validation? Do we want that?
I would not take it perfectly like 100% as what we need to do, but yes, we need some validation.
Okay, so maybe we can just say like plan for validation, right? Survey.
To be honest,
or
a PR might just be enough, but
Yeah,
we might want.
Good.
We might want to do a survey for outside, like we want some validation internally and some validation externally.
Right, I was thinking the PR would be the internal validation.
Yes, but then we need something outside where we ask. So if those were the priorities of Node,
right?
What,
Okay, so I think I can open an issue where we can discuss what kind of external validation we want to do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that way we can figure out if it's a survey or something else. But okay, so we agree we need to do something that will cover what else we need to do. I think one of the other things is like, okay, we have this list, it lands. What do we do to actually support work happening in these areas? Is it like a champion search? What are we going to do? We've said that suitable types are important. Okay. How do we find the people who are interested, willing to help move that one forward? And the same thing goes for any of them, right? Like, is it that we look for champions? Is there something else we could think of to do, or?
I wondered if it would make sense when we go back to our weekly, every 2 weeks meetings, having a session on each of them to get a bit more deeper dive.
Okay, so that actually makes sense. Like a deep dive, so it'd be like deep dive session in next 10 meeting for each priority. I think that's actually a really good way to go, because we probably need a little bit more. What do we mean by each of those? Any other, any other key, and maybe it's a different, do we need to do that deep dive before we PR in those technical priorities?
I wouldn't say so. I think the deep dive would be hoping to get some more concrete actions with things that we're working on.
Yeah, okay, that's good, because otherwise it'd take us a while. And I think we can come up as a team with a good enough explanation of what these mean to get the discussion going on the high level. So yeah.
I wonder if we should also consider expanding the invite list based on what the topic is. For example, observability. Do we invite the diagnostics group along because they might be more
right
into that?
So that I've just added that comment. If you see like invite other working groups for particular sessions or go to their meetings. I think that definitely be, if we can find a group that's already might have an interest in that area, let's go there. And sounds good. Any other next steps on the technical front that we think? That seems to me to be a pretty concrete and solid set of actions that, once we've completed that, we can reevaluate. But if we complete those, I think we'll have accomplished a fair amount. Just because of time, unless people have anything else on that one, I suggest we move on to the next 10 years. Or sorry, for the collaborators.
I think opening up an issue or discussion about the pre-builds is something that should be done. I'm happy to do that, or if someone else wants to, absolutely feel free.
Let me just here, I'm going to copy in the notes, but I will, you've just volunteered, so.
Yeah, I agree. I am happy to +1 on that. I'm not sure if I can put some skills to some effort to it, but I am very happy to, if it's some area that we can potentially think about contributing, I can maybe try to master some workforce if it's standalone enough, but.
So I'm just going to try and trim this down to the core of what we discussed. Let's say. Okay, next step. So Tierney, you'd said open issue discussing.
Yeah, open issue discussing pre-builds.
Pre-builds, right?
I'm happy to do that. I got to drop.
Yep. Okay.
But I'm absolutely happy to do that.
So I've tagged you with that.
Yep.
So, okay. The next one then would be, so I think that's a concrete step on that front. Anything else we would want to do that contribution workflow? I guess similarly, like we could have a deep dive on each of these as well, right? Actually, maybe like the build times, if we open an issue, that may help it, but like maybe a deep dive on this one. Does that make sense to people?
I think, yeah.
Okay. And then this one, I don't know, like Beth, do you think if we open an issue in the TSC repo to discuss that, that would make sense?
I don't know what discussion. Yeah, I guess we can try it.
Or yeah, or any other ideas. I was just thinking like what can we do on that front to you know, we could discuss it more in the next 10 group subset to kind of brainstorm what we could do, or we could open an issue there, or maybe it's worth us, I don't know. Is how much would like the next 10 team on its own have to discuss on that?
Yeah, I don't think they would. I think the discussion would be had within the TSD group around whether they think the group should be maybe it stems from the list of priorities that we're checking in. Maybe it links with that, and we need to discuss those list of priorities on a regular basis. Like,
right? Should we like, you know, like do a at least plan for a regular checkpoint discussion of them?
Yeah, or make them strategic initiatives in their own right or something.
Right. Okay. Okay. That sounds good. I think if anybody wants to volunteer to do that, we can tag them. Otherwise, I don't think we need to do that immediately. At least for me, I might give it a little more thought before I would go and do that. So
I think that one would make sense as a follow-up once we have the PR ready, about to go into the priorities, and then to say
yeah,
what we do with these priorities. Now we have them. Do the TSC need to do anything with them?
right. Okay. Yeah, anything with them like now or in the future in terms of updating them, that kind of, yeah, that's a good way to entry point that. And I will have the action to plan this into one of those, and I can similarly to, Michael. Okay, any other concrete next actions that people can think of that we should add? If not, I have one more thing. I can't make the next 10 meeting, which I think is Monday. So my wondering if there's somebody else who would want to chair that, or do we just want to cancel it for this instance? Having just recently got together. So what are people's preferences? And I guess if the preference is to keep it, volunteer to chair.
Should we keep it because or move it 1 week away?
I am away the next week as well, so we'd need a volunteer for that one.
Okay.
I'm away on most Mondays, and but then the week after, actually the whole week. So I can make the 20th. The next time I can actually make it is the 23rd. So, but again, I don't want to be the blocker. If we've got a volunteer to chair, it should go ahead, and we've got a good list there to.
Sorry, do we have an agenda for the next one? Because if it was going to be one of the deep dives, I think we'd need some more time to get ready for those.
That would be my plan, is to start driving the meetings based on that priority list, because I think we've closed out the initial things that we had, and it'll be then the follow-ons from this.
In that case, I'd probably suggest deferring until we have that list PR open and some approvals on it, so we know where to go from there.
Okay, so maybe unless we've got a volunteer to chair / and in that context, I'll suggest we cancel the one for the 9th and then go from there.
Seems good.
Okay. So thanks for everybody's time. That was a great discussion. I think we came out with some tangible things. I'll take the action to kind of take the notes that were written and put them into a form where we get them into issues in the repo, like the next 10 repo that we can point to. And I look forward to continuing these discussions with everybody. I think that was very useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Michael.
Yep. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.